The first signs of what would become humanity's most existential threat emerged not with fanfare or obvious menace, but through scattered reports from frontier worlds along the eastern fringe that Imperial authorities initially dismissed as routine xenological anomalies. In 745 of the 41st millennium, survey teams and colonial expeditions began encountering organisms that defied conventional classification within the Imperium's extensive xenobiological databases. These creatures appeared on worlds previously thought barren or inhabited only by primitive native species, displaying characteristics that seem to shift and adapt with disturbing rapidity. Imperial biologist teams cataloged what they believed to be separate indigenous species across multiple star systems. On Tyran Primus, reconnaissance units reported encounters with quadrupedal organisms possessing chitinous carapaces and razor-sharp talons that could tear through standard flak armor with ease. The creatures moved with predatory intelligence, coordinating their attacks in ways that suggested a pack mentality far beyond typical animal behavior. Similar reports emerged from nearby systems, describing flying organisms with leathery wings and acid-spitting capabilities that dissolved ceramite plating, and serpentine creatures that burrowed through solid rock with bone-hard drilling appendages. What troubled the few xenobiologists who bothered to examine these scattered reports was the apparent evolutionary impossibility of the organisms. Each creature seemed perfectly adapted to its specific combat role, displaying biological weapon systems that surpassed anything found in nature. The quadrupeds possessed not just claws, but entire limbs that functioned as living weapons, with bone structures that could extend and retract like organic blades. The flying variants demonstrated flight capabilities that should have been impossible given their apparent mass, yet they maneuvered through atmospheric combat with precision that outmatched Imperial aircraft. The first comprehensive encounter with what would later be identified as Tyranid bioforms occurred during the Tyran incident, when an entire Imperial Guard regiment stationed on the world of Tyran Primus went silent during routine patrol operations. When reinforcements arrived 3 months later, they found evidence of a battle unlike anything in Imperial military records. The landscape bore scars of biological warfare, vast areas where the very soil had been dissolved by acidic compounds, leaving behind crystalline formations that pulsed with an alien luminescence. The bodies of Imperial Guardsmen told a horrifying story of adaptive warfare. Autopsy reports revealed that the attacking organisms had somehow countered each defensive measure the regiment employed. Where the Guardsmen had taken cover behind rockcrete barriers, the attacking creatures had developed acid secretions that dissolved the fortifications. When the regiment deployed anti-aircraft weapons against flying attackers, subsequent waves arrived with hardened carapaces that deflected Law's fire and even bolt rounds. Most disturbing of all, the biological matter left behind by destroyed attackers showed signs of rapid decomposition, as if the organisms were designed to leave no trace of their true nature. Imperial command structures, already overwhelmed by the constant demands of maintaining order across 1 million worlds, filed these incidents under standard xenological protocols. The organisms were classified as previously unknown indigenous species, their apparent coordination attributed to pheromone communication or similar biological mechanisms found in various insectoid species throughout the galaxy. This misidentification would prove catastrophic as similar encounters multiplied across dozens of systems along the eastern fringe. While Imperial authorities struggled to understand these scattered encounters, something far more significant was approaching from the intergalactic void. Beyond the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, where the light of stars faded into the cosmic darkness between galactic clusters, ancient bioships that had traveled for millions of years finally detected the psychic beacon that would guide them to their ultimate feeding ground. These vessels, each the size of a small moon and composed entirely of living tissue, belonged to what Imperial scholars would eventually designate as Hive Fleet Behemoth. The bioships of Behemoth represented evolution taken to its logical extreme. Their hulls consisted of chitinous plates that could regenerate damage within hours, while their interiors housed vast chambers filled with genetic material harvested from countless consumed worlds. Massive synaptic creatures served as living command centers, their enlarged neural structures processing tactical information from thousands of smaller organisms throughout the fleet. The ships themselves breathed, their surfaces contracting and expanding as massive lung analogs processed the thin matter of interstellar space. These bioships had crossed the void between galaxies, sustaining themselves on cosmic radiation and the occasional comet or asteroid that crossed their path. Their journey had taken eons, during which the fleet had refined its biological arsenal through countless evolutionary cycles. The organisms within the ships existed in a state of constant genetic flux, with successful adaptations being rapidly integrated into the fleet's collective genome, while failed experiments were absorbed and recycled into new forms. As Hive Fleet Behemoth approached the galactic rim, its synaptic creatures detected something that had drawn them across the impossible distances of intergalactic space. The Astronomicon, humanity's great psychic beacon that guided Imperial vessels through the warp, blazed like a star in the Imperium. To the Hive Mind, this psychic lighthouse represented not navigation aid, but a promise of the greatest feast in the galaxy's history. The beacon indicated not just the presence of life, but life organized on a scale that suggested billions of worlds teeming with biomass ready for consumption. The Astronomicon's signal grew stronger as the fleet approached, and the Hive Mind began to discern individual notes within the psychic symphony. Each human world contributed its own harmonic to the beacon's song, the collective psychic emanations of billions of souls, creating a complex pattern that revealed the distribution of life throughout the galaxy. The Hive Mind could taste the fear, hope, and determination of countless human minds, each emotion adding flavor to the promise of the feast to come. Imperial authorities remained unaware of the approaching fleet, as their long-range auger arrays were designed to detect conventional spacecraft, not living vessels that generated minimal energy signatures. The bioship's organic hulls absorbed most electromagnetic radiation, making them nearly invisible to standard Imperial sensors. Even when deep space monitoring stations detected anomalous gravitational readings, consistent with large mass concentrations moving at sublight speeds, these readings were attributed to asteroid swarms or other natural phenomena. The first Imperial forces to encounter Tyranid organisms in significant numbers found their conventional military doctrine completely inadequate against bioadaptive opponents. On the world of Makraga's honor station, a company of ultramarines responded to distress signals from a research facility that had been studying captured specimens from the Tyran incident. The Space Marines arrived expecting to face a containment breach involving dangerous but ultimately manageable xenoforms. Instead, they encountered creatures that seemed to learn from each exchange of fire. The initial wave of organisms charged directly into bolter fire, their carapaces cracking under the explosive impact of mass reactive rounds. However, subsequent waves displayed hardened bone plates positioned precisely where the previous attackers had taken damage. When the Space Marines switched to plasma weapons to counter the improved armor, the next generation of attackers arrived with reflective surfaces that deflected energy beams and heat-dispersing organs that prevented fatal overheating. The Ultramarines found themselves fighting an enemy that evolved in real time, adapting to their tactics faster than they could develop new ones. Creatures that had been vulnerable to chainsword attacks in the first hour of combat arrived with serrated edges along their limbs that could parry and damage the Space Marines' weapons. Organisms that had initially fled from flamer units returned with flame-retardant secretions and modified respiratory systems that allowed them to function in superheated environments. Most disturbing of all was the apparent intelligence behind these adaptations. The creatures were not simply evolving random defensive mechanisms, they were developing specific countermeasures to Imperial equipment and tactics. When the Space Marines established a defensive perimeter, the attacking organisms began to demonstrate knowledge of Imperial fortification principles, concentrating their attacks on structural weak points that should have been known only to trained military engineers. Similar encounters across multiple worlds revealed that conventional Imperial military doctrine was fundamentally flawed when applied to Tyranid warfare. The Codex Astartes, that great tactical manual that had guided space marine operations for 10,000 years, contained no provisions for enemies that could adapt their biology to counter specific weapons and tactics. Imperial Guard regiments found their standardized equipment and formations useless against opponents that seemed to anticipate their every move. The Tyranids demonstrated an understanding of Imperial psychology that went beyond mere tactical adaptation. They began to employ terror tactics specifically designed to break human morale, using vocalizations that triggered primal fear responses and pheromone releases that induced panic in human nervous systems. Creatures would deliberately wound rather than kill Imperial defenders, leaving them alive to spread fear among their comrades, while their screams attracted more organisms to the battle. As reports of these encounters reached higher levels of Imperial command, military theorists began to realize they were facing something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. Previous xenos threats, from the savage orcs to the technologically advanced Tau, operated according to recognizable principles of warfare. They had weapons, tactics, and limitations that could be studied and countered through conventional military science. The Tyranids represented something entirely different, a form of warfare based on biological adaptation that made traditional concepts of victory and defeat meaningless. The creatures seemed to possess no individual will or desire for survival in any recognizable sense. They fought with absolute coordination, sacrificing themselves without hesitation if such sacrifice served the larger tactical goal. Captured specimens displayed no fear response and appeared incapable of communication in any conventional sense. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to share information instantaneously across vast distances, with organisms on one world immediately benefiting from adaptations developed by their counterparts on entirely different planets. Imperial commanders who had spent their careers studying the art of war found themselves confronting an enemy that operated according to principles they could barely comprehend. The Tyranids were not simply another xeno-species to be conquered or contained. They represented a fundamental challenge to humanity's place in the galaxy, an alien intelligence that viewed all other life as nothing more than raw material for its own endless expansion and evolution. The systematic consumption that would define Hive Fleet Behemoth's assault on the Ultima Segmentum began with a methodical precision that Imperial strategists would later recognize as the hallmark of the Hive Mind's tactical doctrine. Unlike the chaotic raids of Orc-Waz or the lightning strikes of Dark Eldar Corsairs, Behemoth's advance followed a calculated pattern of resource extraction that maximized biomass acquisition while minimizing the fleet's own losses. Each world targeted for consumption had been selected based on criteria that Imperial xenobiologists would spend decades attempting to decode. The fleet's approach toward inhabited systems followed predictable vectors that suggested an intelligence capable of long-term strategic planning on a galactic scale. Behemoth's bioships would establish positions at the edge of target star systems, deploying clouds of spore-like organisms that drifted through the void on solar winds and gravitational currents. These microscopic scouts, later designated mycetic spores by Imperial taxonomists, carried genetic sampling equipment that could analyze the atmospheric composition and biological signatures of planets from millions of kilometers away. Once a world's biomass potential had been assessed, the fleet would begin its consumption protocol with the deployment of vanguard organisms designed specifically for planetary infiltration. These creatures, roughly humanoid in appearance but possessing elongated limbs and razor-sharp claws capable of rending ceramite armor, would establish beachheads on the target world's surface. Their purple-hued carapaces provided natural camouflage in low-light conditions, while specialized organs allowed them to survive in vacuum for extended periods during orbital insertion. The world of Tyran became the first fully documented example of Behemoth's consumption methodology, though Imperial forces would not understand the significance of what they witnessed until much later. The planet's mining colonies reported unusual seismic activity in the weeks preceding the main assault, tremors that geological surveys attributed to natural tectonic shifts. In reality, these disturbances marked the establishment of underground hive complexes, where captured biomass was being processed into new warrior organisms. When the surface assault began, Imperial defenders found themselves facing creatures that seemed purpose-built for their specific environment and opposition. The mining tunnels of Tyran's industrial complexes became hunting grounds for serpentine organisms that could navigate the confined spaces with lethal efficiency. Their segmented bodies, each section equipped with independent sensory organs, allowed them to track multiple targets simultaneously, while their acidic secretions dissolved the rockcrete supports that Imperial forces attempted to use as cover. Above ground, the planet's urban centers became testing grounds for larger bioforms that demonstrated the Hive Mind's ability to create specialized assault troops. These creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall on powerful digitigrade legs, possessed cranial crests that housed enhanced sensory organs, capable of detecting human life signs through solid barriers. Their primary weapons consisted of living projectile launchers integrated into their arm structures, firing bone-hard spines that could penetrate flak armor at ranges exceeding those of standard Imperial lasguns. The consumption of Tyran proceeded with mechanical efficiency as massive bioships descended into the planet's atmosphere, their kilometer-long feeding tendrils extending into population centers and industrial facilities. These organic harvesting mechanisms operated like vast digestive systems, breaking down everything from human bodies to manufactured goods into their component molecules. The process left behind only barren rock and pools of acidic residue that sterilized the soil against any possibility of future biological recovery. Imperial forces attempting to evacuate Tyran's population discovered that the Tyranids had anticipated standard evacuation protocols. Flying organisms with wingspan measurements exceeding those of Imperial Valkyrie gunships patrolled the upper atmosphere, their bioelectric discharge organs capable of disabling aircraft electronics at considerable range. These creatures demonstrated tactical intelligence by coordinating their attacks to force evacuation craft into predetermined kill zones where ground-based organisms waited with specialized anti-aircraft weaponry. The fall of Tyran provided Imperial xenobiologists with their first comprehensive samples of Tyranid organisms, though the analysis of these specimens raised more questions than it answered. The creature's cellular structure defied conventional biological classification, displaying characteristics that suggested artificial genetic manipulation on a scale beyond Imperial understanding. Each organism appeared to be a purpose-built biological machine, optimized for specific combat roles with redundant organ systems that allowed them to continue functioning despite massive trauma. Most disturbing was the discovery that captured specimens continued to transmit biological data even after apparent death. Imperial researchers monitoring the creatures detected low-frequency bioelectric pulses that seemed to carry encoded information about Imperial weapons, tactics, and defensive positions. This suggested that individual organisms served not just as combat units, but as data collection nodes for a larger intelligence network that could rapidly disseminate tactical information across the entire fleet. The naming of the species occurred during emergency sessions of the Imperial Senate's Xenological Committee, where representatives from affected systems gathered to coordinate their response to what they still believed was a localized threat. The creature's first major appearance on Tyran led to their designation as Tyranids, a classification that would prove grimly prophetic as subsequent encounters revealed the true scope of their threat to Imperial space. As Behemoth continued its advance through the Ultima Segmentum, Imperial military commanders began to recognize patterns in the fleet's operational methodology that suggested a level of strategic coordination unprecedented among known xenos species. The Tyranids did not simply attack worlds at random, but followed calculated routes that maximized their biomass acquisition while establishing forward positions for subsequent advances. Worlds with large populations or significant biological resources received priority targeting, while barren or heavily fortified systems were bypassed until more favorable opportunities presented themselves. The fleet's bioships demonstrated remarkable adaptability in their approach vectors, utilizing asteroid fields and stellar phenomena to mask their approach from Imperial detection systems. Their organic hulls absorbed most forms of electromagnetic radiation, making them nearly invisible to conventional auger arrays until they had already established positions within target star systems. When Imperial forces did manage to detect approaching bioships, they found their weapon systems inadequate against targets that could regenerate hull damage within hours and adapt their defensive measures to counter specific types of ordnance. Behemoth's advance toward the Ultramar sector represented the culmination of the fleet's systematic consumption strategy. The region's numerous inhabited worlds and advanced industrial infrastructure promised the largest biomass harvest the fleet had encountered since entering Imperial space. Intelligence gathered from consumed worlds had provided the Hive Mind with detailed information about Ultramar's defensive capabilities, including the disposition of space marine forces and the locations of major population centers. The approach to Macragge itself revealed the true sophistication of Tyranid strategic planning. Rather than launching a direct assault on the heavily fortified world, Behemoth began by seeding the outer system with reconnaissance organisms that established hidden observation posts on uninhabited moons and asteroids. These biological monitoring stations tracked Imperial fleet movements and communication patterns, building a comprehensive picture of Ultramar's defensive network that would prove crucial in the coming battle. Marneus Calgar's first encounter with Tyranid organisms occurred during a routine inspection of Macragge's outer system defenses, when his strike cruiser detected anomalous biological readings from what appeared to be a derelict cargo hauler. The vessel showed signs of recent combat damage, with hull breaches that seemed to have been caused by weapons unknown to Imperial databases. When Calgar led a boarding party to investigate, they found the ship's interior transformed into something resembling a living organism more than a mechanical construct. The corridors had been reshaped by some form of biological growth that pulsed with its own internal lighting, creating an environment that seemed designed to disorient and trap intruders. The walls secreted a viscous substance that interfered with the Space Marine's equipment while releasing pheromones that triggered aggressive responses in human nervous systems. Navigation became nearly impossible as the ship's internal structure seemed to shift and reconfigure itself, sealing off escape routes while channeling the boarding party toward predetermined locations. Calgar's first direct confrontation with a genestealer occurred in what had once been the cargo hauler's main hold, now transformed into a chamber lined with organic pods that pulsed with internal movement. The creature emerged from concealment with speed that challenged even Space Marine reaction times, its forearms terminating in claws capable of rending ceramite armor with surgical precision. The genestealer's elongated skull housed sensory organs that could track movement in complete darkness, while its muscular frame provided strength sufficient to grapple with a fully armored Astartes. The battle that followed demonstrated the fundamental inadequacy of conventional combat doctrine against Tyranid bioforms. Calgar's Power Fist, a weapon capable of crushing tank armor, failed to deliver decisive damage against an opponent whose redundant organ systems allowed it to continue fighting despite massive trauma. The genestealer's claws found gaps in the chapter master's armor with uncanny precision, as if the creature possessed detailed knowledge of Space Marine equipment specifications and vulnerable points. When the creature's claws finally penetrated Calgar's defenses, they severed muscle and bone with efficiency that suggested biological weapons designed specifically for anti-Astartes warfare. The loss of both hands to the genestealer's attack marked not just a personal wound, but a symbolic moment that would define Imperial understanding of the Tyranid threat. Here was an enemy that could match and exceed the combat capabilities of humanity's greatest warriors, using biological weapons that surpassed the finest products of Imperial technology. The systematic analysis of Behemoth's command structure began with the capture and study of larger bioforms that appeared to coordinate the actions of smaller organisms. These creatures, designated synapse creatures by Imperial xenobiologists, possessed enlarged cranial cavities that housed neural structures far more complex than those found in typical Tyranid warriors. Their brains showed evidence of specialized regions dedicated to processing and transmitting biological data, suggesting they served as living communication nodes within the fleet's command hierarchy. The discovery of the Hive Mind's distributed consciousness represented a fundamental breakthrough in Imperial understanding of Tyranid organization. Rather than operating under centralized command like human military forces, the Tyranids functioned as a collective organism where individual creatures served as specialized cells within a larger biological system. Synapse creatures acted as neural clusters that could process tactical information and coordinate the actions of nearby organisms, creating a command structure that remained functional even when individual nodes were destroyed. This distributed intelligence network explained many of the tactical advantages that Tyranid forces displayed in combat. Information gathered by reconnaissance organisms could be instantly transmitted to warrior bioforms, allowing them to adapt their tactics in real time based on observed Imperial defensive measures. The death of individual creatures provided valuable data about enemy weapons and capabilities, information that was immediately integrated into the collective knowledge base and used to develop countermeasures for subsequent waves of attackers. The hierarchical nature of Tyranid synapse control became apparent through careful observation of battlefield behavior patterns. Smaller organisms displayed limited independent intelligence when separated from larger synapse creatures, often reverting to basic predatory instincts that made them easier targets for Imperial forces. However, when operating within the psychic influence of synapse creatures, these same organisms demonstrated tactical coordination and adaptive behavior that challenged the finest Imperial military units. The true origins of the Tyranids remain shrouded in cosmic mystery, with Imperial scholars able to piece together only fragmentary evidence about their emergence from the intergalactic void. What xenobiological analysis has revealed suggests that these organisms represent the ultimate expression of biological evolution taken to its logical extreme across multiple galactic cycles. The Tyranids appear to have originated from beyond the galactic rim, in the vast emptiness between galaxies where conventional life cannot survive. Their bioships show evidence of having traveled for millions of years through this cosmic desert, sustaining themselves on cosmic radiation, interstellar dust, and the occasional matter they encountered during their epical journey. The prevailing theory among Imperial xenobiologists posits that the Tyranids function as a pan-galactic harvesting organism, a biological mechanism designed to consume entire galaxies before moving on to the next feeding ground. This hypothesis emerged from analysis of Tyranid genetic material, which contains biological patterns suggesting exposure to stellar radiation types found only in distant galactic clusters. The creature's cellular structure includes specialized organelles that can process exotic matter compositions, indicating they have encountered and consumed life forms with biochemistries fundamentally different from anything found in the Milky Way galaxy. Evidence for this pan-galactic origin comes from the discovery of trace elements within Tyranid biomass that do not occur naturally in local stellar formations. Spectroscopic analysis of these elements reveals isotopic signatures consistent with stellar nucleosynthesis patterns found in galaxies millions of light-years distant. The presence of these exotic materials within Tyranid organisms suggests they have indeed traveled the intergalactic void, carrying within their genetic structure the accumulated biological knowledge of countless consumed worlds across multiple galactic systems. The Hive Fleets themselves represent mobile ecosystems of staggering complexity, with each bioship functioning as a self-contained biological factory capable of creating new organisms from raw materials. The construction process of these living vessels defies conventional understanding of both biology and engineering, as the ships grow rather than being built through mechanical assembly. Imperial observers have documented bioships in various stages of development, revealing that they begin as relatively small organic cores that gradually accumulate mass through the absorption of consumed biomatter. The growth process of a hive ship involves the systematic integration of biological material harvested from consumed worlds, with specialized organs within the ship's structure breaking down everything from organic tissue to manufactured goods into their component molecules. These molecular building blocks are then recombined according to genetic templates stored within the ship's vast biological databases, creating new sections of hull plating, weapon systems, and internal organs as needed. The process operates with efficiency that surpasses any Imperial manufacturing facility, converting raw materials into functional ship components at rates measured in tons per hour. Each bioship serves as a mobile ecosystem containing millions of individual organisms in various stages of development and specialization. The ship's internal chambers house vast pools of genetic material where new bioforms are cultivated according to tactical requirements determined by the Hive Mind's analysis of upcoming engagements. These biological laboratories can produce everything from microscopic reconnaissance organisms to massive assault creatures, with development times ranging from hours to weeks, depending on the complexity of the desired bioform. The internal structure of hive ships resembles a cross between a living organism and a highly organized industrial complex. Corridors pulse with circulatory systems that transport nutrients and genetic material throughout the vessel, while specialized chambers serve specific functions within the ship's biological economy. Digestion pools break down consumed matter into usable components, while spawning chambers nurture developing organisms in nutrient-rich amniotic fluids. Command nodes house the massive synapse creatures that coordinate the ship's activities, their enlarged neural structures interfacing directly with the vessel's biological control systems. The ships themselves breathe through massive spiracles that can process the thin matter of interstellar space, extracting useful elements while filtering out harmful radiation. Their hulls consist of chitinous plates that can regenerate damage through accelerated cellular division, with repair times that depend on the availability of raw materials and the extent of the damage. Minor hull breaches can be sealed within hours, while major structural damage requires the ship to consume additional biomass to fuel the regeneration process. Tyranid bioadaptation capabilities represent perhaps the most terrifying aspect of their biological arsenal, allowing them to evolve countermeasures to enemy weapons and tactics within single engagements. This rapid evolution operates through mechanisms that combine conventional genetic mutation with directed biological engineering, guided by the hive mind's accumulated tactical knowledge. When Tyranid organisms encounter new threats, their deaths provide valuable data about enemy capabilities that is instantly transmitted to the collective consciousness and used to develop appropriate countermeasures. The adaptation process begins at the cellular level, where specialized organelles monitor environmental conditions and enemy actions, recording information about weapon effects, defensive measures, and tactical patterns. This data is encoded into biological memory structures that can be transmitted to other organisms through biochemical signals or direct neural interface. The hive mind processes this information through vast biological computing networks, analyzing patterns and developing genetic modifications that will improve survival rates in similar encounters. Implementation of these adaptations occurs through rapid genetic modification of developing organisms, with spawning chambers receiving updated genetic templates that incorporate the necessary changes. Existing organisms can also undergo limited adaptation through the activation of dormant genetic sequences or the rapid growth of new biological structures. This process allows Tyranid forces to counter specific threats within hours of first encountering them, creating situations where Imperial forces find their weapons increasingly ineffective as battles progress. The recycling of biomass represents a crucial component of Tyranid operational efficiency, with every organic molecule being carefully processed and reused according to the fleet's current needs. When Tyranid organisms die, their bodies are rapidly broken down by specialized decomposer organisms that extract useful biological components while neutralizing any harmful substances. This process operates with near-perfect efficiency, leaving behind only trace amounts of inorganic residue that cannot be incorporated into new biological structures. The recycling process extends beyond Tyranid casualties to include all organic matter encountered during planetary consumption. Human bodies, native wildlife, plant matter, and even processed organic compounds are broken down into their component molecules and sorted according to their potential uses. Proteins are harvested for structural applications, genetic material is analyzed for useful adaptations, and energy-rich compounds are processed into biological fuel for the fleet's various operations. This biological recycling creates a closed-loop system where nothing is wasted and every encounter provides resources for future expansion. The efficiency of this process allows Tyranid fleets to maintain their operational capabilities even during extended campaigns far from major biomass sources. Dead organisms become raw material for new warriors, while captured enemy equipment is analyzed for useful technologies that can be replicated through biological means. The Hive Mind psychic network structure represents one of the most sophisticated forms of collective consciousness known to Imperial scholars, operating through mechanisms that combine biological neural networks with psychic phenomena that transcend conventional understanding of both biology and warp-based communication. The network functions as a vast distributed intelligence where individual organisms serve as specialized processing nodes within a larger computational system that spans entire star systems. Synapse creatures form the primary nodes of this network, their enlarged neural structures serving as biological relay stations that can process and transmit vast amounts of tactical and sensory data. These creatures possess brain structures that dwarf those of most sentient species, with specialized regions dedicated to different aspects of fleet coordination. Some areas process sensory input from reconnaissance organisms, while others analyze tactical data and formulate strategic responses to changing battlefield conditions. The psychic component of the network operates through mechanisms that Imperial psychers describe as fundamentally alien to human psychic phenomena. Rather than channeling energy from the warp in the manner of human psychers, the Hive Mind appears to generate its own psychic field through the collective mental activity of billions of organisms. This field creates a form of psychic background noise that can disrupt conventional warp-based communication and navigation systems across vast distances. The shadow in the warp phenomenon represents the most strategically significant aspect of Tyranid psychic activity, creating zones of psychic interference that can render Imperial communication systems useless and drive human psychers to madness or death. This effect manifests as a pressing darkness in the warp that drowns out the normal psychic emanations of human minds, making it impossible for astropaths to send or receive messages across interstellar distances. The shadow's effects extend far beyond simple communication disruption, creating psychological pressure that affects all humans within its influence. Imperial personnel report feelings of overwhelming dread and isolation when operating in areas affected by the shadow, as if they have been cut off from the rest of humanity at a fundamental level. These psychological effects can severely impact unit cohesion and combat effectiveness, making Imperial forces more vulnerable to Tyranid assault tactics. The mechanism behind the shadow in the warp involves the collective psychic emanations of Tyranid organisms, creating interference patterns that disrupt normal warp currents. The effect intensifies with the concentration of Tyranid forces, reaching maximum intensity in areas where major bioships or large numbers of synapse creatures are present. Imperial scholars theorize that the shadow serves multiple purposes beyond communication disruption, potentially providing the Tyranids with protection against warp-based attacks while also creating navigational hazards for enemy fleets. The range and intensity of the shadow vary depending on the size and composition of Tyranid forces in a given area. Small scouting forces may create only minor psychic disturbances detectable by sensitive psychers, while major Hive fleet concentrations can project the shadow across entire star systems. The effect appears to be cumulative, with multiple Tyranid forces in proximity creating shadow effects that exceed the sum of their individual contributions. Imperial attempts to counter the shadow in the warp have met with limited success, as conventional psychic defenses prove inadequate against the alien nature of Tyranid psychic phenomena. Standard psychic wards and protective rituals provide minimal protection, while attempts to use human psychers to penetrate the shadow often result in madness or death, as their minds are overwhelmed by the alien intelligence pressing against them. The hierarchical structure of Tyranid synapse control creates multiple layers of command and coordination that ensure fleet operations continue even when individual synapse creatures are eliminated. At the highest level, massive bioships house Hive tyrants and other apex organisms whose neural capacity allows them to coordinate entire planetary invasions. These creatures serve as regional command nodes that can process tactical information from thousands of subordinate organisms while maintaining direct communication with the broader Hive Mind. Intermediate synapse creatures such as warriors and primes provide tactical coordination at the company and battalion level, their enhanced neural structures allowing them to control groups of basic organisms while serving as communication relays for higher-level commands. These creatures demonstrate individual tactical intelligence that rivals trained Imperial officers, capable of adapting their strategies based on battlefield conditions while maintaining perfect coordination with other Tyranid forces. The loss of synapse creatures creates immediate tactical vulnerabilities as organisms under their control revert to basic instinctual behavior, but the distributed nature of the network ensures that other synapse creatures can quickly establish control over leaderless organisms. This redundancy makes it extremely difficult for Imperial forces to achieve lasting tactical advantages through the elimination of individual command creatures, as the network rapidly adapts to compensate for losses. The arrival of Hive Fleet Kraken in Imperial space marked a fundamental evolution in Tyranid strategic doctrine that would force Imperial commanders to completely reconsider their understanding of the Great Devourer's tactical capabilities. Unlike Behemoth's concentrated assault vector that had allowed Imperial forces to track and eventually intercept the fleet at Crag, Kraken employed a fragmentation strategy that demonstrated the Hive Mind's capacity for adaptive learning on a strategic scale. The fleet's approach toward the galactic rim began conventionally enough, with massive bioships maintaining formation as they crossed the void between star systems. But as Kraken encountered the first Imperial detection networks, it began to divide itself into dozens of smaller splinter fleets. This fragmentation occurred through a process that Imperial observers initially mistook for fleet damage or internal conflict among the Tyranid organisms. Bioships that had traveled together for millennia began to separate, with smaller vessels budding off from larger ones, like biological cells undergoing mitosis. The process involved the systematic redistribution of genetic material and specialized organisms throughout the fragmenting fleet, ensuring that each splinter retained the full spectrum of Tyranid biological capabilities while operating as an independent tactical unit. The strategic brilliance of this approach became apparent as Imperial forces attempted to coordinate their response to what they believed was a single approaching threat, only to discover that Kraken had become dozens of separate fleets, attacking across a front spanning multiple sectors simultaneously. Each splinter fleet possessed sufficient biomass and genetic diversity to establish independent breeding pools and adapt to local conditions, while maintaining psychic communication with the broader Hive Mind through long-range synapse creatures that could coordinate activities across vast distances. The fragmentation strategy maximized Kraken's consumption efficiency by allowing simultaneous attacks on multiple target worlds, preventing Imperial forces from concentrating their defenses while ensuring that even successful defensive actions against individual splinters would not significantly impact the fleet's overall operational capacity. This distributed approach also provided redundancy that made the fleet nearly impossible to eliminate through conventional military action, as the destruction of individual splinters merely reduced the overall threat without eliminating it entirely. Imperial strategic analysts studying Kraken's approach patterns identified consumption optimization as the primary driver behind the fragmentation strategy. Each splinter fleet appeared to target worlds based on specific biomass criteria, with some focusing on high-population hive worlds, while others attacked agricultural planets or industrial centers with significant organic processing facilities. This specialization allowed individual splinters to develop tactical doctrines optimized for their specific target types, creating bioforms and assault strategies tailored to overcome the particular defensive measures they expected to encounter. The coordination between splinter fleets demonstrated the sophisticated nature of Tyranid strategic planning, with individual fleets adjusting their attack vectors and timing to support the activities of other splinters operating in adjacent systems. When Imperial forces concentrated their defenses against one splinter fleet, others would accelerate their own operations to prevent the redeployment of defensive assets. This coordination occurred without any detectable communication between the fleets, suggesting that the fragmentation process had included the distribution of predetermined strategic protocols that allowed each splinter to anticipate and support the actions of its counterparts. The Lamenters chapter became one of the first Imperial military units to experience the full tactical implications of Kraken's fragmentation strategy when they responded to distress calls from the Corellia system, where a splinter fleet had begun the systematic consumption of 3 inhabited worlds simultaneously. The chapter's strike cruisers arrived expecting to face a conventional Tyranid assault that could be countered through established tactical doctrines developed during the Behemoth campaign, but instead found themselves confronting an enemy that had evolved beyond their previous understanding of Tyranid capabilities. The Lamenter's initial engagement with Kraken organisms revealed immediately that these creatures possessed biological capabilities that exceeded those encountered during previous Tyranid incursions. The Splinter Fleet's warrior organisms displayed enhanced carapace structures that provided superior protection against bolter fire, while their weapon organisms demonstrated improved accuracy and range that challenged Space Marine tactical doctrines based on superior firepower and equipment. Most significantly, the creatures showed evidence of specific adaptations designed to counter Space Marine combat capabilities, suggesting that the Hive Mind had incorporated detailed analysis of Astartes warfare into its genetic databases. Captain Malik Amphoros led the Lamenter's assault on the primary Hive ship threatening Corellia Prime, expecting to replicate the successful boarding actions that had proven effective against Behemoth bioships. Instead, his assault companies encountered internal defenses that seemed specifically designed to counter Space Marine boarding tactics. The bioship's corridors had been configured to channel attackers into kill zones, where specialized organisms waited with weapons optimized for close-quarters combat against power-armored opponents. The creatures defending the bioship's interior demonstrated tactical intelligence that surpassed anything the Lamenters had encountered in previous engagements with xenos forces. They employed coordinated ambush tactics that exploited the confined spaces of the ship's organic corridors, using their knowledge of the vessel's layout to outmaneuver the Space Marines despite their superior individual combat capabilities. The organisms appeared to communicate through methods that bypassed conventional detection, coordinating their attacks with precision that suggested real-time tactical analysis and response. As the boarding action progressed deeper into the bioship, the Lamenters encountered their first examples of the new bioforms that Kraken had developed during its journey through Imperial space. These creatures represented significant evolutionary advances over the organisms that had comprised Behemoth's forces, displaying specialized adaptations that addressed the tactical limitations identified during previous engagements with Imperial forces. The genetic templates for these new bioforms had been distributed throughout Kraken's splinter fleets, ensuring that Imperial forces would encounter them across multiple theaters simultaneously. The Carnifex bioforms that the Lamenters encountered in the bioship's central chambers represented the Hive Mind solution to the problem of engaging heavily armored opponents in confined spaces. These massive creatures stood nearly 4 meters tall on powerful legs that terminated in razor-sharp talons capable of finding purchase on any surface, while their primary arms had been replaced with massive bone and chitin-crushing claws that could exert pressure sufficient to deform ceramic plating. Their heads housed enlarged brain structures that provided enhanced tactical intelligence, allowing them to coordinate with smaller organisms while maintaining independent operational capability. The Carnifex's carapace structure incorporated lessons learned from previous encounters with Imperial heavy weapons, featuring layered bone plates that could absorb and distribute the impact of explosive ordnance, while specialized organs beneath the surface could rapidly seal breaches caused by penetrating attacks. Their internal structure included redundant organ systems that allowed them to continue fighting despite massive trauma, while specialized glands could produce acidic secretions that dissolved armor and weapons that came into contact with their claws. Combat with these creatures required the Lamenters to abandon conventional Space Marine assault tactics in favor of coordinated heavy weapons fire that could overwhelm the Carnifex's defensive capabilities through sustained bombardment. Even then, the creature's redundant biological systems allowed them to continue fighting long after sustaining damage that would have incapacitated conventional opponents, forcing the Space Marines to expend enormous amounts of ammunition to achieve decisive kills. The appearance of Ravena bioforms during the Lamenter's withdrawal from the bioship demonstrated Kraken's development of specialized pursuit organisms designed to exploit the mobility advantages that Space Marines traditionally relied upon to disengage from unfavorable tactical situations. These serpentine creatures possessed segmented bodies that allowed them to navigate through spaces too confined for larger organisms, while powerful muscular systems provided speed that could match or exceed that of retreating Space Marines even in difficult terrain. Ravenas displayed hunting behaviors that suggested sophisticated predatory intelligence, using their knowledge of Space Marine tactical doctrines to anticipate withdrawal routes and establish ambush positions along likely escape paths. Their sensory organs could track targets through multiple types of concealment, while specialized boring organs allowed them to create new passages through solid barriers when existing routes were blocked or defended. The creature's acidic blood served as both a defensive mechanism and a tactical weapon, as wounds inflicted on Ravenas would spray corrosive fluid that could damage equipment and injure nearby Imperial personnel. The Lamenter's casualties during their engagement with Kraken's splinter fleet exceeded anything the chapter had experienced since their founding, with entire companies being reduced to a handful of survivors through encounters with bioforms that seemed specifically designed to counter their tactical advantages. The chapter's apothecaries reported wound patterns that suggested the Tyranid organisms possessed detailed knowledge of Space Marine physiology, targeting specific vulnerabilities in power armor systems and exploiting gaps in protection that should have been known only to the Adeptus Mechanicus tech adepts who maintained the equipment. The systematic devastation of Imperial forces across multiple sectors forced high-level strategic reassessment, as reports arrived describing similar tactical developments in splinter fleet engagements throughout the affected regions. The Tyranids were not simply adapting to local conditions, but implementing fleet-wide evolutionary improvements that addressed fundamental weaknesses in their previous tactical doctrines. This suggested a level of strategic coordination and learning capability that challenged Imperial understanding of xenos' intelligence and organizational capacity. The threat to Eandon Craftworld emerged as one of Kraken's splinter fleets detected the massive psychic signature generated by the Eldar population concentrated within the Craftworld's Wraithbone structure. The fleet's approach toward the Craftworld demonstrated tactical planning that incorporated detailed knowledge of Eldar defensive capabilities, with bioships positioning themselves to exploit known weaknesses in Craftworld point defense systems, while deploying specialized organisms designed to counter Eldar psychic abilities and advanced technology. Farseer Kelman's prescient visions had provided the Craftworld's leadership with advance warning of the approaching threat, but the fragmented nature of Kraken's assault made it impossible to determine the exact timing and vector of the attack through conventional divination. The Splinter Fleet's bioships approached along multiple vectors simultaneously, using asteroid fields and stellar phenomena to mask their approach, while deploying reconnaissance organisms that could observe Eldar defensive preparations without triggering the Craftworld's early warning systems. The initial assault on Eandon's outer defenses revealed that Kraken had developed specific countermeasures for Eldar military technology, with bioforms that could resist the effects of shuriken weaponry and organisms whose psychic resistance made them difficult targets for Eldar psykers. The attacking creatures demonstrated tactical knowledge of Craftworld layout and defensive protocols that suggested detailed intelligence gathering, possibly through the consumption of Eldar populations on previously attacked worlds or through psychic analysis of captured Eldar personnel. Eandon's aspect warriors found their traditional tactical advantages neutralized by organisms that seemed designed to counter their specific combat specializations. Striking scorpions encountered creatures with sensory organs that could detect their stealth approaches, while Dark Reapers faced bioforms whose carapace structures provided resistance to heavy weapons fire. The Tyranids appeared to have developed countermeasures for each aspect shrine's combat doctrines, forcing the Eldar to adapt their tactics in real time to maintain combat effectiveness. The Craftworld's Wraithguard constructs provided some tactical advantages against the Tyranid assault, as their artificial nature made them immune to many of the biological weapons that proved effective against living opponents. However, Kraken's forces demonstrated rapid adaptation even to these advantages, developing specialized bioforms with weapons designed to disrupt the psychic matrices that animated the Wraithbone constructs. These creatures could project psychic interference that severed the connection between Eldar spirit stones and their Wraithbone bodies, effectively neutralizing the constructs without destroying them. The unprecedented alliance between Eandon's forces and nearby Imperial military units emerged from tactical necessity, as both factions recognized that their individual defensive capabilities were insufficient to repel Kraken's assault. The coordination between Eldar and Imperial forces required complex negotiations that overcame millennia of mutual distrust and conflicting strategic objectives, with both sides agreeing to share tactical intelligence and coordinate their defensive operations against the common Tyranid threat. The Alliance's first joint operation involved Imperial Navy vessels providing fire support for Eldar strike forces attacking Tyranid bioships, with human gunners targeting areas designated by Eldar Farseers, whose prescient abilities allowed them to identify critical vulnerabilities in the living vessel's structure. This coordination proved more effective than either force could achieve independently, as Imperial firepower could exploit weaknesses that Eldar forces lacked the heavy weapons to address, while Eldar tactical intelligence provided targeting information that Imperial forces could not obtain through conventional reconnaissance. The emergence of Moloch bioforms during the defense of Eandon represented perhaps the most terrifying development in Kraken's biological arsenal, as these massive subterranean predators demonstrated the Hive Mind's ability to create organisms specifically designed for siege warfare against fortified positions. These creatures possessed powerful boring organs that allowed them to tunnel through solid rock and wraithbone with equal facility, while their sensory systems could detect targets through kilometers of solid matter by analyzing vibration patterns and thermal signatures. Molochs employed ambush tactics that exploited their ability to remain hidden beneath the surface until optimal attack opportunities presented themselves, emerging without warning to attack targets that believed themselves safely positioned behind defensive barriers. Their massive size and crushing strength allowed them to destroy fortifications and heavy equipment through direct physical assault, while their acidic secretions could dissolve even wraithbone structures given sufficient contact time. The creature's ability to retreat underground after attacking made them nearly impossible to counter through conventional defensive measures, as they could strike and withdraw before defenders could organize effective responses. The psychological impact of Moloch attacks on both Imperial and Eldar forces proved as significant as their direct tactical effects, as the knowledge that massive predators could emerge without warning from beneath apparently solid ground created constant tension that affected unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. Defensive positions that had previously provided security became potential death traps, while movement across open ground became exercises in anticipating subterranean ambush attacks. The deliberate orchestration of the Octarius War began with Inquisitor Kryptman's controversial decision to weaponize the Tyranid threat against another of humanity's most persistent enemies. Following his experiences during the Behemoth and Kraken incursions, Kryptman had developed an intimate understanding of Tyranid behavioral patterns and consumption priorities. His analysis of captured synapse creature neural tissue and bioship navigation systems revealed that Hive Fleet Leviathan's approach vectors could be influenced through strategic manipulation of biomass concentrations and psychic signatures across their projected path. Kryptman's Exterminatus campaigns across 17 worlds in the Octarius sector represented one of the most ruthless applications of Imperial strategic doctrine in recorded history. Each targeted world contained significant orc populations that had been identified as potential biomass sources for the approaching Leviathan tendril. The Inquisitor's cyclonic torpedoes reduced these worlds to lifeless rock, creating a corridor of dead systems that would force the Hive Fleet to alter its consumption route toward more viable targets. The Orc Empire of Octarius, ruled by the massive warlord Overfiend Gajkul Mag, Uruk Thraka's former lieutenant Scarjo, controlled dozens of worlds teeming with the biomass that Tyranid fleets required for continued expansion. The orc population density in this region exceeded even major Imperial Hive worlds, with billions of greenskins concentrated across industrial strongholds and fortress worlds that had been developed over centuries of constant warfare. The psychic emanations from such massive orc concentrations created a beacon in the warp that Tyranid bioships could detect from considerable distances. The redirection strategy required precise timing and extensive intelligence gathering about both Tyranid navigation patterns and orc territorial boundaries. Kryptman's agents spent months analyzing bioship movement data to determine optimal interception points where Leviathan's course could be altered without allowing the fleet to fragment and pursue alternative targets. The Inquisitor's calculations indicated that properly positioned exterminatus actions could create a biomass gradient that would draw the Hive Fleet inexorably toward the orc-controlled systems. Imperial Navy vessels under Kryptman's command executed the sterilization protocol with mechanical efficiency, arriving at target worlds just hours ahead of Tyranid vanguard organisms to ensure maximum tactical impact. The cyclonic torpedoes penetrated planetary atmospheres and detonated in carefully calculated patterns that would maximize atmospheric dispersal of the viral compounds while ensuring complete biosphere elimination. Within days, worlds that had supported millions of orcs became barren wastelands that offered no sustenance for approaching bioships. The psychological impact of these actions on Imperial personnel proved nearly as devastating as their strategic implications. Naval crews found themselves destroying worlds that could have been defended, eliminating populations that might have served as allies against the Tyranid threat. The moral weight of these decisions created significant tension within Kryptman's command structure, with several senior officers requesting transfer rather than participate in what they viewed as unnecessary genocide. Leviathan's bioships detected the sterilized worlds through long-range reconnaissance organisms that analyzed atmospheric compositions and biological signatures from the edge of each star system. The sudden absence of biomass along their projected course triggered adaptive navigation protocols that redirected the fleet toward the nearest viable consumption targets. The Hive Mind's tactical analysis identified the Octarius Orc Empire as the optimal alternative, with its massive greenskin populations providing sufficient biomass to sustain continued fleet operations. The first contact between Leviathan's vanguard organisms and Orc defenders occurred on the industrial world of Gorala, where Warboss Scarjo had established massive weapon foundries that supplied arms to Orc forces throughout the sector. The initial Tyranid assault followed standard consumption protocols, with genestealer infiltrators establishing underground breeding colonies, while aerial organisms secured orbital supremacy around the planet. However, the Orcs' response to this invasion differed fundamentally from typical Imperial defensive strategies. Orc military doctrine embraced direct confrontation with enthusiasm that bordered on suicidal recklessness, viewing the Tyranid invasion not as an existential threat, but as the ultimate expression of warfare that their species had evolved to conduct. Scarjo's response to reports of strange alien creatures consuming Orc settlements involved immediate mobilization of every available warrior for what he termed the biggest fight ever. The Warboss's tactical planning consisted primarily of identifying the largest concentrations of Tyranid organisms and directing his forces to attack them with maximum aggression. The fundamental incompatibility between Tyranid consumption strategies and Orc regenerative biology became apparent during the first major engagement between the species. Tyranid digestion pools, designed to break down consumed biomass into component molecules for reprocessing, proved inadequate for dealing with Orc physiology. The greenskins' symbiotic relationship with their fungal ecosystem meant that Orc bodies continued to release spores even after death, with these reproductive cells surviving the digestive process and establishing new Orc populations within Tyranid bioships and ground installations. The contamination of Tyranid biological systems by Orc spores created unprecedented complications for fleet operations. Bioships found their internal chambers overrun by rapidly growing Orc fungi that interfered with normal biological processes while providing nutrients for developing greenskin organisms. These internal Orc populations began attacking Tyranid organisms from within the bioships themselves, creating a form of biological warfare that the Hive Mind had never encountered in its millions of years of galactic consumption. Tyranid adaptation protocols struggled to develop effective countermeasures against an enemy that reproduced through mechanisms completely alien to conventional biological reproduction. The Hive Mind's genetic databases contain no templates for organisms capable of neutralizing fungal spore dispersal without also disrupting the bioship's own biological functions. Attempts to develop anti-fungal compounds proved counterproductive, as these substances interfered with the symbiotic organisms that maintained bioship integrity and function. The Orcs' response to Tyranid bioadaptation capabilities demonstrated their species' own form of evolutionary flexibility through technological improvisation and tactical innovation. When Tyranid organisms developed resistance to standard Orc weaponry, the greenskins responded by creating increasingly exotic weapon systems that exploited different vulnerabilities in their enemy's biological structure. Mechboys throughout the Octarius sector began producing specialized anti-Tyranid equipment that incorporated captured biomatter into hybrid biological mechanical weapons. Orc Stormboys units developed aerial combat techniques specifically designed to exploit the flight patterns of Tyranid flying organisms, using their rocket packs to achieve superior maneuverability while targeting the creature's wing joints and sensory organs with focused weapons fire. These tactics proved particularly effective against gargoyle swarms, as the Orcs' reckless approach to aerial combat allowed them to engage the creatures at ranges where their superior numbers provided minimal advantage. The development of Squigoth cavalry units represented one of the most successful Orc tactical innovations during the early stages of the conflict. These massive native creatures, already integrated into Orc military doctrine through generations of domestication, proved remarkably resistant to Tyranid bioweapons due to their thick hides and redundant organ systems. Orc riders equipped their mounts with specialized armor plating and heavy weapons that could engage Tyranid monsters on relatively equal terms. The perpetual stalemate that emerged from this conflict resulted from the fundamental incompatibility between Tyranid consumption strategies and Orc regenerative capabilities. Every Tyranid victory that eliminated Orc populations also spread spores that would eventually produce new greenskin armies, while every Orc triumph provided additional biomass that the Hive Fleet could process into replacement organisms. The war became a self-sustaining cycle where neither side could achieve decisive victory without simultaneously strengthening their opponent. Tyranid bioships attempting to process consumed Orc biomass found their digestion systems compromised by persistent spore contamination that created ongoing internal conflicts between Tyranid organisms and emerging Orc populations. These biological civil wars within individual bioships reduced fleet efficiency while forcing the Hive Mind to dedicate increasing resources to internal security rather than external expansion. Some bioships became so heavily contaminated that they effectively ceased functioning as coherent military units, becoming mobile battlegrounds where Tyranids and Orcs fought continuous battles within the vessel's organic corridors. The Orcs' ability to thrive in the toxic environments created by Tyranid bioweapons provided them with significant tactical advantages in prolonged engagements. While other species required extensive protective equipment to survive exposure to Tyranid acid spores and toxic gas clouds, Orc physiology proved remarkably adaptable to these hazardous conditions. Some Orc subspecies even began to display beneficial mutations that improved their resistance to specific Tyranid bioweapons, suggesting that the greenskins were undergoing their own evolutionary adaptation in response to the threat. The emergence of new Orc subspecies during the prolonged conflict demonstrated the species' capacity for rapid evolutionary development under extreme selective pressure. These Octarius Orcs displayed enhanced aggression, improved tactical coordination, and specialized biological adaptations that made them more effective against Tyranid opponents. Their increased size and strength allowed them to engage Tyranid warrior organisms in direct combat with improved survival rates, while enhanced sensory capabilities helped them detect infiltrating genestealers and other stealth-adapted bioforms. The tactical intelligence displayed by these evolved Orcs exceeded anything previously documented in Imperial studies of greenskin behavior. They began employing sophisticated ambush tactics that exploited Tyranid behavioral patterns, using their understanding of bioship operations to target critical systems and support organisms. Some Orc forces developed specialized boarding techniques that allowed them to infiltrate Tyranid vessels and establish permanent footholds within the bioship's internal structure. Tyranid forces responded to these challenges by developing increasingly specialized bioforms designed specifically for anti-Orc warfare. These creatures incorporated genetic material harvested from consumed greenskins, creating hybrid organisms that combined Tyranid adaptive capabilities with Orc resilience and aggression. However, these adaptations often proved counterproductive, as the incorporated Orc genetic material carried spore-producing capabilities that continued to contaminate Tyranid biological systems. The development of Tyranofex organisms represented the Hive Mind's attempt to create siege specialists capable of destroying Orc fortifications through sustained bombardment. These massive creatures possessed specialized weapon organisms that could fire explosive projectiles with accuracy sufficient to target specific structural weak points in Orc defensive positions. Their heavily armored carapaces provided protection against Orc heavy weapons, while redundant organ systems allowed them to continue fighting despite significant damage. However, the Tyranofex's effectiveness was limited by the Orcs' rapid adaptation of their defensive strategies. Mechbuys began incorporating captured Tyranid biomatter into their fortification designs, creating hybrid structures that could regenerate damage while maintaining structural integrity under bombardment. These biological fortifications proved remarkably difficult for Tyranid forces to eliminate, as they combined Orc engineering principles with self-repairing capabilities derived from Tyranid organisms. Imperial monitoring stations established around the Octarius sector provided strategic intelligence about the ongoing conflict while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid direct involvement in the fighting. These observation posts, staffed by Adeptus Mechanicus Tech Adepts and Imperial Guard reconnaissance specialists, documented the evolution of both species through detailed analysis of battlefield debris and captured organisms from both sides. The intelligence gathered from these monitoring efforts revealed disturbing trends that suggested both species were becoming more dangerous through their mutual conflict. Orc forces were developing improved coordination and tactical sophistication that made them more effective against all opponents, not just Tyranids. Meanwhile, Tyranid organisms were incorporating beneficial genetic traits from consumed Orc biomass, creating hybrid bioforms with enhanced resilience and aggression that could prove devastating if deployed against Imperial forces. Strategic analysts within the Ordo Xenos began developing contingency plans for intervention in the Octarius conflict, as it became apparent that either potential victor would pose an enhanced threat to Imperial space. A victorious Orc empire, strengthened by generations of warfare against the galaxy's most dangerous predators, could launch a war of unprecedented scale and ferocity. Alternatively, a successful Tyranid fleet that had adapted to overcome Orc regenerative capabilities would possess biological weapons capable of countering humanity's most effective defensive strategies. The logistical implications of the perpetual war created resource drains that affected both species' ability to expand into adjacent territories. Tyranid bioships found themselves committed to the Octarius conflict for extended periods, unable to pursue other consumption targets while dealing with ongoing Orc contamination and resistance. Similarly, Orc forces throughout the sector became focused on the Tyranid threat, reducing their traditional raiding activities against Imperial and other Xenos territories. This tactical stalemate provided temporary relief for Imperial forces in surrounding sectors, as both major Xenos threats became locked in mutual combat rather than expanding their territorial control. However, Imperial strategists recognized that this situation was ultimately unsustainable, as the conflict was strengthening both species through evolutionary pressure, while consuming resources that could otherwise be directed toward Imperial conquest. The emergence of hybrid combat techniques that combined elements from both species' tactical doctrines created new forms of warfare that challenged existing Imperial military theory. Orc forces began employing biological weapons derived from captured Tyranid organisms, while some Tyranid bioforms displayed the reckless aggression and technological adaptability characteristic of greenskin military culture. These developments suggested that the conflict was producing evolutionary convergence that could result in hybrid threats combining the worst aspects of both species. The approach of Hive Fleet Leviathan from beneath the galactic plane represented a fundamental shift in Tyranid strategic doctrine that caught Imperial forces completely unprepared for the scale and sophistication of the threat. Unlike the previous Hive fleets that had arrived from the eastern fringe along predictable vectors that allowed Imperial monitoring stations to track their progress, Leviathan emerged from the galactic south, where few early warning systems existed. The fleet's bioships had traveled through the cosmic void below the galaxy's primary disk, navigating by stellar radiation patterns and gravitational anomalies that remained invisible to conventional Imperial auger arrays positioned to monitor threats from more traditional approach vectors. Imperial astrocartographers had long considered the galactic south a region of minimal strategic importance, containing few inhabited systems, and serving primarily as a buffer zone between Imperial space and the unknown regions beyond the galaxy's edge. The sparse distribution of monitoring stations in this region reflected strategic priorities focused on more immediate threats from orc empires, chaos incursions, and the ongoing conflicts along the eastern fringe, where previous Tyranid encounters had established expected attack patterns. This defensive blind spot allowed Leviathan's massive bioships to approach within striking distance of major Imperial worlds before their presence was detected by routine patrol sweeps. The fleet's emergence into Imperial space occurred simultaneously across multiple sectors, as dozens of bioship clusters breached the galactic plane at carefully coordinated points that maximized their strategic impact while minimizing Imperial response capabilities. Each emergence point had been selected through analysis of Imperial defensive deployments, with Leviathan's reconnaissance organisms having spent months mapping Imperial fleet positions and communication networks from concealed positions in the outer darkness. The coordinated nature of these multiple breaches demonstrated strategic planning capabilities that exceeded anything previously observed in Tyranid operations. Leviathan's bioships displayed evolutionary improvements that incorporated lessons learned from previous Hive Fleet encounters with Imperial forces. Their hulls featured enhanced void shielding organisms that provided superior protection against Imperial weapons, while specialized sensory clusters allowed them to detect and analyze Imperial fleet movements from unprecedented distances. The ships themselves had grown larger than their predecessors, with some specimens measuring over 50 kilometers in length and possessing internal chambers capable of housing millions of combat organisms in various stages of development. The fleet's vanguard organisms established forward operating bases on uninhabited worlds throughout the target regions, using these positions to conduct extended reconnaissance missions that gathered detailed intelligence about Imperial defensive capabilities and population distributions. These advanced forces operated with unprecedented patience and tactical sophistication, spending months observing Imperial activities before beginning their assault operations. Their intelligence-gathering capabilities allowed Leviathan to identify optimal attack vectors and timing that would maximize biomass acquisition while minimizing resistance from defending forces. The consumption of multiple Space Marine homeworlds began with carefully orchestrated infiltration campaigns that exploited weaknesses in each chapter's defensive protocols. Leviathan's lictor organisms demonstrated remarkable improvements in stealth capabilities and tactical intelligence, allowing them to penetrate even the most heavily defended fortress monasteries without triggering security systems or alerting defending forces. These creatures had evolved specialized camouflage organs that could mimic local environmental conditions with perfect accuracy, while their enhanced neural structures provided tactical analysis capabilities that rivaled trained Imperial officers. The Scythes of the Emperor chapter faced the full fury of Leviathan's assault when a major tendril of the fleet targeted their homeworld of Satha for consumption. The planet's strategic importance as a space marine recruitment world and its significant population made it an ideal target for the Hive Fleet's biomass requirements. The initial infiltration occurred months before the main assault, with lictor organisms establishing hidden observation posts throughout the planet's major population centers, while conducting detailed reconnaissance of the chapter's defensive positions and operational capabilities. Chapter Master Thorsyra received the first reports of unusual creature sightings from planetary defense forces investigating livestock disappearances and unexplained equipment failures at remote monitoring stations. These incidents followed patterns that suggested intelligent coordination rather than random predation, with missing personnel and damaged equipment indicating the presence of creatures possessing both stealth capabilities and detailed knowledge of Imperial technology. The chapter's librarians detected subtle psychic disturbances that suggested xenos' presence, but the signals were too faint and dispersed to provide actionable intelligence about the nature or scale of the threat. The lictor's reconnaissance activities provided Leviathan with comprehensive intelligence about Satha's defensive capabilities, population distribution, and the Scythes of the Emperor's tactical doctrines and equipment specifications. These creatures possessed enhanced memory organs that could store vast amounts of observational data, while specialized neural processors analyzed this information to identify optimal attack strategies. Their reports, transmitted through bioelectric pulses to orbiting reconnaissance organisms, allowed the Hive Mind to develop detailed assault plans that exploited specific vulnerabilities in the chapter's defenses. When Leviathan's main assault force arrived in the Satha system, the bioships deployed with tactical precision that demonstrated complete knowledge of Imperial defensive positions and response protocols. The fleet's approach vectors avoided known sensor arrays, while specialized jamming organisms disrupted communications between planetary defense installations and orbital monitoring stations. The bioships established positions that maximized their bombardment capabilities while minimizing exposure to the planet's defensive weapons, using their detailed reconnaissance data to identify blind spots in the coverage patterns of ground-based anti-orbital batteries. The initial planetary bombardment employed bioweapons specifically designed to counter space marine defensive advantages while preparing the surface for ground assault operations. Spore pods containing acidic organisms targeted the chapter's vehicle pools and ammunition depots, dissolving ceramite armor plating and detonating stored ordnance through chemical reactions that bypassed conventional explosive safeguards. Mycetic spores carrying specialized electromagnetic pulse organisms disabled communication systems and power generation facilities, isolating defending forces while disrupting their coordination capabilities. The ground assault that followed demonstrated Leviathan's development of anti-space marine combat doctrines that incorporated detailed analysis of Astartes' tactics and equipment specifications. The attacking bioforms displayed specific adaptations designed to counter power armor systems, with claws and bioweapons optimized to exploit known weak points in Mark 7 and Mark 8 armor designs. These creatures possessed enhanced strength and speed that allowed them to match space marine combat capabilities, while their redundant organ systems provided survivability that exceeded even Astartes' resilience. Tyranid warrior organisms leading the assault displayed tactical intelligence that rivaled experienced space marine sergeants, coordinating complex multi-unit maneuvers that exploited terrain features and defensive positions with professional competence. These creatures had been specifically developed to counter space marine combat doctrines, possessing enhanced sensory organs that could detect concealed positions and movement patterns, while their bioweapons provided firepower equivalent to Imperial heavy weapon systems. Their ability to operate independently while maintaining perfect coordination with other units created tactical flexibility that challenged traditional space marine advantages in small unit operations. The Scythes of the Emperor's fortress monastery came under direct assault from specialized siege organisms that demonstrated intimate knowledge of Imperial fortification principles and construction techniques. Moloch bioforms tunneled beneath the fortress walls to attack foundation structures, while Carnifex organisms equipped with biocannons targeted specific architectural weak points identified through prior reconnaissance. The coordination between these different bioform types created combined arms tactics that systematically dismantled the fortress's defensive capabilities through focused attacks on critical systems and structural elements. Captain Thorsira led the chapter's final defensive stand from the fortress monastery's primary command center, coordinating the actions of surviving battle brothers while attempting to maintain communication with off-world Imperial forces. The Tyranid assault had severed most external communications, but sporadic transmissions revealed that similar attacks were occurring simultaneously across multiple space marine homeworlds throughout the region. The scope of Leviathan's offensive exceeded anything in Imperial military history, with entire chapters facing extinction as coordinated bioship fleets consumed their recruiting worlds and fortress monasteries. The near destruction of the Scythes of the Emperor occurred over several days of continuous combat as Tyranid forces systematically eliminated the chapter's defensive positions while processing captured biomass through mobile digestion organisms. The creatures displayed remarkable efficiency in their consumption operations, breaking down everything from human bodies to manufactured equipment into component molecules that could be immediately incorporated into new bioforms. This real-time resource processing allowed the attacking force to maintain its operational tempo while adapting its tactics based on observed Imperial defensive responses. Surviving battle brothers reported encounters with Tyranid organisms that seemed to possess detailed knowledge of individual space marines' combat capabilities and tactical preferences. These creatures demonstrated the ability to anticipate specific maneuvers and weapon deployments, suggesting that the Hive Mind had developed psychological profiles of defending personnel through extended observation. The personal nature of these tactical adaptations created psychological pressure that affected even veteran space marines, as they found their individual fighting styles and tactical instincts systematically countered by opponents who seemed to know their every move. The chapter's gene seed repositories became primary targets for specialized Tyranid organisms equipped with biological analysis systems that could identify and extract the genetic material essential to space marine recruitment and training. These creatures possess detailed knowledge of gene seed storage protocols and security measures, allowing them to locate and breach even the most heavily protected vaults. The loss of these genetic resources represented not just tactical defeat, but the potential extinction of the chapter's bloodline and combat traditions accumulated over millennia of service. The evacuation of surviving scythes of the Emperor personnel occurred through desperate rearguard actions that allowed small groups of battle brothers to reach extraction points where Imperial Navy vessels waited to evacuate the planet's remaining defenders. These operations required enormous sacrifice as veteran sergeants and company champions volunteered for suicide missions that delayed Tyranid advances long enough for their battle brothers to escape. The chapter's casualties exceeded 90%, with most surviving members suffering severe injuries that would require extensive augmetic reconstruction and psychological conditioning. Similar devastation occurred across multiple Space Marine homeworlds, as Leviathan's coordinated assault eliminated entire chapters, or reduced them to a handful of survivors scattered across different star systems. The Lamenters, already weakened by their previous encounters with Hive Fleet Kraken, faced complete annihilation when bioships targeted their fleet-based operations with specialized void warfare organisms. The Aurora chapter lost their homeworld of Talisar to a tendril that employed previously unknown bioforms capable of operating in the planet's unique atmospheric conditions. The innovative tactics employed by Leviathan represented a quantum leap in Tyranid strategic sophistication that incorporated lessons learned from all previous Hive Fleet encounters with Imperial forces. The fleet's lictor organisms had evolved beyond simple reconnaissance roles to become sophisticated intelligence gathering specialists capable of conducting extended infiltration operations that provided detailed tactical intelligence about target worlds and defending forces. These creatures possessed enhanced cognitive capabilities that allowed them to analyze complex tactical situations and develop comprehensive assault plans based on observed enemy capabilities and behavioral patterns. Leviathan's lictors demonstrated the ability to operate independently for extended periods while maintaining communication with the broader Hive Mind through specialized bioelectric transmission organs. These creatures could establish concealed observation posts that remained undetected for months while gathering intelligence about Imperial defensive preparations and personnel movements. Their enhanced memory organs allowed them to store vast amounts of tactical data, while specialized analysis structures processed this information to identify optimal attack strategies and timing. The development of advanced camouflage capabilities allowed these organisms to infiltrate even heavily secured Imperial installations without triggering detection systems or alerting security personnel. Their skin could mimic local environmental conditions with perfect accuracy, while specialized organs suppressed their biological signatures to levels below Imperial sensor thresholds. Some specimens demonstrated the ability to assume crude approximations of human appearance, allowing them to observe Imperial activities from close range, while gathering detailed intelligence about equipment specifications and tactical procedures. The coordination between Lictor reconnaissance operations and main fleet assault forces reached unprecedented levels of sophistication, as real-time intelligence updates allowed bioships to adjust their attack vectors and deployment strategies based on current defensive conditions. This tactical flexibility enabled Leviathan to exploit temporary weaknesses in Imperial defenses while avoiding areas where resistance had been strengthened or reinforced. The fleet's ability to adapt its operational plans in response to changing conditions demonstrated strategic thinking capabilities that challenged Imperial assumptions about xenos' intelligence and organizational capacity. The extended infiltration campaigns conducted by Leviathan's advance forces provided the Hive Mind with detailed psychological profiles of defending personnel that enabled the development of terror tactics specifically designed to exploit human fear responses and break unit cohesion. The creatures began employing vocalizations and pheromone releases that triggered primal panic reactions in human nervous systems, while their attack patterns deliberately targeted unit leaders and communication specialists to maximize the psychological impact of their assaults. The ongoing nature of Leviathan's threat stems from the fleet's unprecedented size and the distributed nature of its operations across multiple galactic regions simultaneously. Unlike previous Hive fleets that operated as unified forces with identifiable command structures and predictable movement patterns, Leviathan functions as a vast network of semi-independent tendrils that can coordinate their activities while pursuing separate operational objectives. This distributed approach makes the fleet nearly impossible to eliminate through conventional military action, as the destruction of individual tendrils has minimal impact on the overall threat. Current Imperial intelligence estimates suggest that Leviathan's bioships number in the thousands, with new vessels continuing to emerge from the intergalactic void as the fleet's main body approaches the galactic rim. The fleet's reproductive capabilities allow it to replace losses while expanding its overall size through the consumption of captured biomass, creating a self-sustaining cycle of growth that threatens to overwhelm Imperial defensive capabilities through sheer numerical superiority. Each successful consumption operation provides resources for the creation of additional bioships and combat organisms, exponentially increasing the fleet's combat power. The fleet's current advances toward the Segmentum Solar represent the most serious threat to the heart of the Imperium since the Horus Heresy, with multiple tendrils approaching along vectors that could potentially threaten Terra itself. Imperial strategic analysts have identified several possible approach routes that would bring Leviathan's forces within striking distance of humanity's birthworld, scenarios that would require the mobilization of every available Imperial military asset to counter. The psychological impact of Tyranid forces operating in the same star system as the Emperor's throne would create panic throughout the Imperium that could prove as devastating as any military defeat. The Segmentum Solar's defensive preparations have required the redeployment of military assets from across the Imperium, weakening defenses in other regions, while concentrating maximum firepower around humanity's most critical worlds. Space Marine chapters have been recalled from distant crusades, while Imperial Guard regiments and naval battle groups have been repositioned to create defensive lines that could potentially halt Leviathan's advance. These preparations represent the largest military mobilization in Imperial history, demonstrating the unprecedented nature of the threat facing humanity. Advanced Tyranid reconnaissance organisms have already been detected in the outer reaches of the Segmentum Solar, conducting the same extended intelligence gathering operations that preceded successful assaults on other Imperial regions. These creatures have established observation posts on uninhabited worlds and asteroid installations, gathering detailed information about Imperial defensive positions and fleet movements while remaining undetected by conventional security measures. Their presence indicates that Leviathan's main assault forces are approaching, and that the final confrontation between humanity and the Great Devourer may be imminent. The insidious nature of genestealer infiltration represents perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the Tyranid threat, as these organisms operate not through overwhelming force, but through the systematic corruption of human society from within. Unlike the massive bioships and swarming hordes that announce their presence through obvious destruction, genestealers work in shadows and silence, transforming loyal Imperial citizens into willing servants of the Hive Mind across generations of careful genetic manipulation. Their infiltration methodology exploits humanity's greatest strengths, our capacity for cooperation, our social bonds, and our faith, turning these virtues into vectors for species-wide corruption. The genestealer life cycle begins with a single pure strain organism establishing contact with a human host through the implantation of genetic material via specialized ovipositor organs located within their tongues. This process, known as the sacred union to those infected, involves the genestealer's reproductive cells integrating with the host's genetic structure at a cellular level. The infected individual experiences immediate psychological changes as alien genetic material begins altering their brain chemistry, creating an overwhelming sense of euphoria and spiritual fulfillment that masks the fundamental transformation occurring within their body. The first generation of hybrids produced from these unions displays obvious xenos characteristics that would immediately identify them as aberrant to Imperial authorities. These creatures, designated first-generation hybrids by Imperial xenobiologists, possess elongated skulls, chitinous skin patches, and multiple arms that clearly mark their alien heritage. Their appearance necessitates concealment within the deepest levels of hive cities or remote industrial facilities, where their presence can remain hidden from routine Imperial inspections and civilian populations. Despite their monstrous appearance, first-generation hybrids retain human-level intelligence enhanced by xenos sensory capabilities and instinctive understanding of Tyranid biological systems. These creatures serve as the cult's primary laborers and defenders, using their enhanced strength and natural weapons to protect breeding facilities, while their hybrid nature allows them to operate human machinery and understand Imperial technology. Their psychological conditioning creates absolute loyalty to the cult's objectives, while their alien heritage provides them with tactical capabilities that exceed normal human limitations. Second-generation hybrids represent a crucial evolutionary step in the infiltration process, as their more human appearance allows them to move through Imperial society with reduced risk of detection. These individuals retain obvious xenos characteristics such as elongated limbs, unusual skin pigmentation, and enlarged cranial structures, but their overall appearance falls within the range of human mutation that might be attributed to radiation exposure or genetic drift in isolated populations. This ambiguity allows them to function in roles that require limited social interaction while maintaining their positions within legitimate Imperial institutions. The psychological profile of second-generation hybrids reveals individuals capable of complex reasoning and emotional manipulation, traits that make them ideal candidates for recruitment and conversion operations. Their enhanced empathic abilities allow them to identify potential converts, while their understanding of human psychology enables them to exploit personal vulnerabilities and social tensions. These creatures often serve as cult recruiters, using their apparent humanity to approach isolated or desperate individuals who might be receptive to the cult's promises of belonging and purpose. Third-generation hybrids achieve near-human appearance that allows them to integrate fully into Imperial society while retaining subtle xenos enhancements that provide significant advantages in their infiltration missions. These individuals can pass routine medical examinations and genetic screenings, though detailed analysis by trained xenobiologists might reveal anomalies in their cellular structure and neural development. Their ability to function as normal Imperial citizens makes them invaluable assets for long-term infiltration operations targeting government institutions, military organizations, and religious hierarchies. The cognitive capabilities of third-generation hybrids often exceed those of baseline humans, with enhanced memory retention, improved pattern recognition, and accelerated learning abilities that make them highly effective in administrative and technical roles. Their natural charisma and empathic sensitivity allow them to excel in positions requiring social interaction, while their absolute devotion to the cult's objectives ensures they will exploit these positions to advance the infiltration process. Many third-generation hybrids achieve positions of significant authority within Imperial institutions, using their influence to protect cult activities and recruit additional converts. Fourth-generation hybrids appear completely human to all but the most sophisticated genetic analysis, allowing them to achieve the highest levels of Imperial society without detection. These individuals possess only subtle xenos traits that manifest as enhanced physical capabilities, unusual sensory acuity, or distinctive psychological characteristics that might be attributed to exceptional breeding or training. Their human appearance combined with their alien-enhanced abilities often leads to rapid advancement through Imperial hierarchies, as their superior performance draws positive attention from superiors unaware of their true nature. The psychological conditioning of fourth-generation hybrids creates individuals who genuinely believe themselves to be loyal Imperial citizens, while simultaneously working to advance cult objectives through subconscious compulsions and instinctive behaviors. This internal conflict often manifests as religious fervor or ideological extremism that provides cover for their subversive activities. Many fourth-generation hybrids achieve positions within the ecclesiarchy, Imperial Guard command structure, or planetary governments, using their authority to implement policies that unknowingly benefit cult operations. The establishment of cult infrastructure within Imperial society follows carefully planned phases that exploit existing social structures and institutional weaknesses. Initial infiltration focuses on marginalized populations in underhive communities, industrial districts, and frontier settlements, where Imperial oversight remains minimal and social cohesion has deteriorated due to economic hardship or administrative neglect. These environments provide ideal breeding grounds for cult ideology, as desperate individuals prove receptive to promises of purpose, community, and spiritual fulfillment. Cult recruitment operations employ sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that identify and exploit individual vulnerabilities while gradually introducing converts to increasingly radical ideologies. Initial contact often involves seemingly innocent social organizations, religious study groups, or mutual aid societies that provide genuine benefits to participants while slowly introducing them to cult doctrine. The process of conversion occurs over months or years, with each stage designed to increase the convert's emotional investment while isolating them from external support networks that might challenge their new beliefs. The cult's organizational structure mirrors legitimate Imperial institutions, with cells operating independently to prevent security breaches while maintaining communication through trusted intermediaries. This cellular approach allows the cult to survive the discovery and elimination of individual groups while protecting higher-level operations from exposure. Each cell specializes in specific activities such as recruitment, intelligence gathering, resource acquisition, or direct action, with coordination occurring through coded messages and prearranged signals that avoid detection by Imperial security services. Financial networks established by cult infiltrators exploit their positions within Imperial banking, trade, and manufacturing organizations to divert resources toward cult operations, while maintaining plausible cover for these transactions. Third and fourth generation hybrids working within these institutions use their access to redirect funds, equipment, and materials to cult facilities, while creating documentation that explains these transfers as legitimate business activities. The complexity of Imperial bureaucracy provides excellent cover for these operations, as the vast scale of interplanetary commerce makes individual transactions difficult to trace. The infiltration of planetary governments occurs through the systematic placement of cult members in key administrative positions where they can influence policy decisions and resource allocation while protecting cult activities from official investigation. These infiltrators often achieve their positions through legitimate means, using their enhanced capabilities to excel in competitive examinations and advancement opportunities. Once established, they work to recruit additional government personnel while using their authority to redirect official resources toward cult objectives. Military infiltration represents one of the most dangerous aspects of cult operations, as hybrid agents within Imperial Guard regiments and planetary defense forces gain access to weapons, training, and strategic intelligence that significantly enhance cult capabilities. These infiltrators often achieve non-commissioned officer positions where they can influence training programs, equipment distribution, and operational planning, while identifying potential recruits among their subordinates. The military's emphasis on loyalty and unit cohesion provides excellent cover for cult recruitment activities disguised as team-building exercises or informal social gatherings. The role of the patriarch within cult hierarchy extends far beyond simple leadership, as these ancient genestealers serve as living conduits between the cult and the greater Hive Mind. Patriarchs possess psychic abilities that allow them to maintain telepathic contact with their hybrid offspring across vast distances while coordinating cult activities through direct mental communication. Their enhanced intelligence and centuries of experience make them master strategists capable of planning infiltration operations that span multiple generations and adapt to changing circumstances. Patriarch psychology combines alien cunning with deep understanding of human nature, acquired through generations of observation and manipulation. These creatures possess detailed knowledge of imperial institutions, social structures, and psychological vulnerabilities that they exploit to maximize infiltration effectiveness. Their ability to assume human form when necessary allows them to interact directly with high-value targets, while their psychic powers enable them to influence decision-making processes without revealing their true nature. The Magus serves as the cult's spiritual leader and primary recruiter, using a combination of genuine charisma and psychic manipulation to attract converts while providing ideological justification for cult activities. These individuals often possess formal religious training or theological education that lends credibility to their teachings, while their hybrid nature provides them with enhanced empathic abilities that make them highly effective at identifying and exploiting potential converts' psychological needs. Magus doctrine typically incorporates elements of established imperial religious traditions with subtle modifications that gradually introduce cult ideology without triggering immediate suspicion from orthodox believers. The process involves reinterpreting familiar religious concepts to support cult objectives, while introducing new practices and beliefs that strengthen converts' emotional attachment to the organization. This theological approach allows the cult to operate within existing religious frameworks while slowly transforming them into vehicles for alien infiltration. The coordination between patriarchs and magi creates a dual leadership structure that combines strategic planning with operational implementation. The patriarch's ancient wisdom and psychic abilities provide long-term strategic direction, while the Magus handles day-to-day recruitment and indoctrination activities. This division of responsibilities allows the cult to maintain operational security while ensuring that both strategic and tactical objectives receive appropriate attention. The fall of Gossar Quintus demonstrates the devastating effectiveness of mature genestealer cult operations when they achieve sufficient infiltration of planetary governance and defense systems. The planet's industrial economy and stable population made it an ideal target for long-term infiltration, with cult operations beginning nearly 2 centuries before the final uprising. Initial infiltration focused on the planet's mining operations, where dangerous working conditions and minimal imperial oversight created opportunities for cult recruitment among desperate workers. The cult's growth on Gossar Quintus followed classic infiltration patterns, beginning with first-generation hybrids establishing breeding facilities in abandoned mine shafts, while second-generation hybrids recruited converts among the mining workforce. The planet's industrial accidents and equipment failures provided cover for hybrid activities, while the dangerous nature of mining work explain the high casualty rates that concealed cult breeding operations. Over several generations, the cult achieved significant penetration of the planet's labor organizations, industrial management, and local government. The planetary governor's family became infected during the final generation of infiltration, with fourth-generation hybrids achieving marriage connections that placed them within the highest levels of planetary authority. These hybrid infiltrators used their positions to implement policies that unknowingly benefited cult operations, while suppressing investigations into unusual activities in the industrial districts. Their influence extended to the planetary defense forces, where hybrid officers ensured that security sweeps avoided cult facilities, while recruitment operations targeted military personnel. The Genestealer Wars encompassed multiple planetary uprisings that occurred when cult infiltration reached critical mass and Hive Fleet tendrils approached the target systems. These coordinated rebellions demonstrated the strategic patience of Genestealer operations, as cults that had remained dormant for generations suddenly activated to prepare their worlds for Tyranid consumption. The timing of these uprisings coincided with the arrival of Hive Fleet reconnaissance organisms, creating coordinated operations that maximized biomass acquisition while minimizing resistance from Imperial forces. The uprising on Gossar Quintus began with simultaneous attacks on planetary communication facilities, defense installations, and government buildings as cult forces emerged from concealment to seize control of critical infrastructure. The attackers demonstrated detailed knowledge of Imperial security protocols and defensive positions, allowing them to neutralize resistance before organized counterattacks could develop. Hybrid infiltrators within the planetary defense forces sabotaged weapons depots and communication systems, while providing tactical intelligence that enabled cult forces to exploit weaknesses in Imperial defensive preparations. The psychological impact of these uprisings on Imperial personnel proved as devastating as their tactical effects, as loyal soldiers found themselves fighting against individuals they had known and trusted for years. The revelation that respected colleagues, family members, and religious leaders had been alien infiltrators created paranoia and suspicion that undermined unit cohesion and command authority. Many Imperial forces suffered complete morale collapse when confronted with the scope of the infiltration, while others turned their weapons on suspected cult members among their own ranks. The coordination between cult uprisings and arriving Tyranid forces created tactical situations that Imperial military doctrine had never anticipated. Cult forces provided detailed intelligence about Imperial defensive positions while sabotaging critical systems and eliminating key personnel. When Tyranid bioships arrived in the system, they found planets already partially consumed by internal conflict, while their advanced organisms received support from established cult networks that had prepared landing sites and identified priority targets for immediate assault. The systematic evolution of Tyranid bioforms represents one of the most terrifying aspects of the Great Devourer's threat to the galaxy, as each encounter with Imperial forces provides genetic templates and tactical data that the Hive Mind incorporates into increasingly specialized and deadly organisms. The progression from basic warrior organisms to apex predators demonstrates the species' capacity for directed evolution that operates on timescales measured in hours rather than millennia, creating biological weapons systems that surpass anything achieved through conventional technological development. The foundational bioforms of any Tyranid swarm begin with the ubiquitous hormagaunts and termagants, creatures that serve as the primary assault troops and screening forces for larger organisms. Hormagaunts possess elongated limbs terminating in razor-sharp scything talons that can rend through flak armor with ease, while their digitigrade legs provide speed that allows them to close with enemy positions faster than most Imperial troops can react. Their skeletal structure incorporates hollow bones similar to avian species, reducing their overall mass while maintaining structural integrity sufficient to support their aggressive combat role. Termagants fulfill the role of ranged support troops, their primary arms replaced by living weapons that fire chitinous spines with accuracy comparable to Imperial las guns. These creatures possess enlarged cranial cavities that house enhanced optical organs capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously while calculating trajectory adjustments for their bioweapons. Their spine-firing organisms, known as flesh borers, draw ammunition from the creature's own body mass, creating projectiles that carry toxins and digestive enzymes capable of dissolving armor plating and causing massive tissue damage to organic targets. The development of genestealers as specialized infiltration and close combat organisms demonstrates the Hive Mind's ability to create bioforms optimized for specific tactical roles that complement the capabilities of basic warrior organisms. These creatures possess forearms terminating in claws capable of rending ceramite armor, while their muscular frames provide strength sufficient to grapple with fully equipped space marines. Their elongated skulls house sensory organs that can operate in complete darkness while detecting pheromone trails and bioelectric signatures that allow them to track targets through multiple types of concealment. Genestealer physiology incorporates redundant organ systems that allow them to continue fighting despite massive trauma, while specialized glands produce pheromones that can influence human behavior and create psychological dependency in infected individuals. Their reproductive capabilities extend beyond simple breeding to include the implantation of genetic material that transforms human hosts into hybrid offspring over multiple generations. This biological infiltration capacity makes genestealers uniquely dangerous among Tyranid organisms, as they can establish self-sustaining populations within enemy territory without requiring support from the main Hive fleet. The emergence of Tyranid warriors as battlefield commanders and synapse creatures represents a significant evolutionary advancement that provides tactical coordination capabilities essential for complex military operations. These organisms stand approximately 3 meters tall on powerful legs that terminate in razor-sharp talons, while their primary arms can be configured with various bioweapons depending on tactical requirements. Their enlarged cranial structures house neural networks capable of processing tactical information from hundreds of subordinate organisms, while maintaining psychic communication with higher-level synapse creatures and the broader Hive Mind. Warrior organisms demonstrate individual tactical intelligence that rivals trained Imperial officers, capable of analyzing battlefield conditions and adapting their strategies in real time based on enemy actions and terrain features. Their enhanced cognitive capabilities allow them to coordinate complex multi-unit maneuvers while maintaining perfect synchronization with other Tyranid forces through the synapse network. The loss of warrior organisms creates immediate tactical vulnerabilities as smaller creatures under their control revert to basic instinctual behavior, making these synapse creatures priority targets for Imperial forces. The bioweapon configurations available to warrior organisms reflect the Hive Mind's adaptive approach to different combat scenarios. Death Spitters provide sustained fire support with living projectiles that explode on impact, while venom cannons fire larger organisms that can penetrate heavy armor before releasing toxic payloads. Bone swords incorporate monomolecular edges that can cut through most materials, while specialized neural interfaces allow the weapons to anticipate enemy movements and adjust their attack patterns accordingly. Carnifex organisms represent the Hive Mind's answer to Imperial heavy armor and fortified positions, with massive frames that can absorb enormous amounts of damage while delivering devastating close combat attacks. These creatures typically measure 4 meters in height and possess bone and chitin carapaces that can deflect all but the heaviest Imperial weapons. Their primary weapons consist of massive crushing claws capable of tearing through tank armor, while their heads can be equipped with various ranged bioweapons that provide fire support during their advance toward enemy positions. The internal structure of Carnifex organisms incorporates multiple redundant organ systems that allow them to continue fighting despite catastrophic damage to individual body systems. Their muscular development provides strength sufficient to overturn Imperial vehicles, while their bone structure can withstand direct hits from las cannons and missile launchers. Specialized glands within their bodies produce acidic secretions that enhance their close combat effectiveness while providing additional armor penetration capabilities against heavily protected targets. Carnifex adaptations vary based on the tactical requirements of specific engagements, with some specimens developing enhanced ranged capabilities, while others focus on improved close combat performance. Thornback variants possess specialized projectile launchers that can engage targets at extended range, while Screamer killers incorporate bioacoustic weapons that can disorient enemy forces while advancing. These adaptations demonstrate the Hive Mind's ability to modify existing bioform templates to address specific tactical challenges encountered during combat operations. The development of Hive Guard organisms addresses the tactical requirement for specialized anti-armor capabilities that can engage Imperial vehicles and aircraft with precision fire support. These creatures possess specialized biocannons that fire living projectiles capable of seeking targets through advanced sensory guidance systems. Their impaler cannons launch organisms that can penetrate heavy armor before releasing internal payloads, while shock cannons fire bioelectric charges that can disable electronic systems and cause massive damage to mechanical targets. Hive Guard sensory capabilities include enhanced targeting organs that can track multiple targets simultaneously while calculating optimal firing solutions based on target movement patterns and defensive capabilities. Their bioweapons demonstrate remarkable accuracy at extended ranges, with projectile organisms capable of adjusting their flight paths to compensate for target evasion maneuvers. The creature's heavy carapaces provide protection against return fire, while their redundant organ systems ensure continued combat effectiveness despite significant battle damage. The tactical deployment of Hive Guard organisms typically involves positioning them in concealed locations where they can provide fire support for advancing assault troops while remaining protected from direct enemy fire. Their ability to engage targets without line of sight makes them particularly effective against Imperial forces attempting to use terrain features for cover, as their seeking projectiles can navigate around obstacles to strike concealed targets. This capability forces Imperial commanders to maintain constant movement and avoid establishing static defensive positions that Hive Guard organisms can target with sustained fire. Zoanthrope organisms represent the pinnacle of Tyranid psychic evolution, with enlarged cranial structures that house neural networks capable of channeling devastating psychic attacks against enemy forces. These creatures float above the battlefield through psychic levitation, their atrophied bodies supported entirely by their massive brain structures. Their psychic abilities include the projection of bioelectric lances that can penetrate any known armor, while their defensive capabilities create psychic barriers that can deflect incoming fire. The psychic phenomena generated by zoanthrope organisms extend beyond simple offensive capabilities to include battlefield manipulation effects that can alter local environmental conditions and disrupt enemy equipment. Their warp lance attacks channel raw psychic energy that bypasses conventional armor protection to directly damage target internal systems, making them particularly effective against Imperial vehicles and heavy equipment. The creature's psychic screams can cause psychological trauma in human personnel while disrupting communication systems and electronic equipment across wide areas. Zoanthrope tactical deployment requires careful coordination with other Tyranid forces, as their specialized capabilities make them valuable assets that require protection from enemy fire while they channel their psychic attacks. Their ability to float above ground-level obstacles allows them to maintain optimal firing positions while remaining mobile enough to avoid concentrated enemy fire. The psychic network connections between zoanthrope organisms and other synapse creatures create redundant command structures that ensure continued tactical coordination even when individual psychic organisms are eliminated. Environmental adaptations observed across different hive fleets demonstrate the Tyranid species' remarkable ability to modify their biological systems to operate effectively in diverse planetary conditions and tactical situations. Gargoyle organisms developed for void warfare possess specialized respiratory systems that allow them to survive in vacuum conditions while maintaining their flight capabilities through bioelectric propulsion systems. Their wing structures incorporate flexible membranes that can seal automatically when damaged, preventing catastrophic decompression while maintaining limited flight capability. The adaptation of gargoyle organisms for different atmospheric conditions includes modifications to their respiratory systems that allow them to process various gas mixtures while filtering out toxic compounds that would prove lethal to most organic life forms. Their sensory organs can operate across extended electromagnetic spectrums, providing target acquisition capabilities in environments with unusual lighting conditions or atmospheric interference. These adaptations make gargoyle swarms effective in diverse planetary environments ranging from toxic industrial worlds to the vacuum conditions around orbital installations. Moloch variants developed for deep tunneling operations possess specialized boring organs that can penetrate solid rock and reinforced materials through a combination of acidic secretions and mechanical drilling action. These massive creatures can remain dormant beneath planetary surfaces for extended periods while monitoring surface vibrations and thermal signatures that indicate optimal ambush opportunities. Their sensory capabilities include seismic detection organs that can track target movements through kilometers of solid matter, allowing them to position themselves for devastating surprise attacks. The tunneling capabilities of Moloch organisms create tactical advantages that extend beyond simple ambush attacks to include the creation of underground transportation networks that allow other Tyranid forces to move undetected between different battlefield positions. Their massive size and crushing strength enable them to create tunnel systems large enough to accommodate significant numbers of smaller organisms, while their acidic secretions can dissolve obstacles that would block conventional excavation efforts. These tunnel networks often become permanent features that provide strategic advantages for subsequent Tyranid operations in the same region. The emergence of the Swarm Lord as the Hive Mind's supreme battlefield commander represents the ultimate expression of Tyranid tactical evolution, combining the accumulated combat experience of countless engagements with biological capabilities that exceed any other known organism. This unique creature possesses 4 arms equipped with bone sabers that incorporate monomolecular edges capable of cutting through any known material, while its enhanced neural structure provides tactical intelligence that surpasses the greatest Imperial military commanders. The Swarmlord's carapace incorporates adaptive armor plating that can adjust its protective properties based on incoming weapon types, while specialized organs provide regenerative capabilities that allow it to recover from injuries that would prove fatal to other organisms. The Swarmlord's tactical capabilities include real-time analysis of battlefield conditions and enemy capabilities, allowing it to develop and implement complex strategic plans that adapt continuously based on changing circumstances. Its enhanced psychic abilities enable direct communication with all Tyranid forces within its operational area, while its presence strengthens the synapse network connections that coordinate swarm activities. The creature's combat experience encompasses data from every major engagement fought by Tyranid forces throughout their galactic expansion, creating a repository of tactical knowledge that informs its strategic decisions. The psychological impact of the Swarmlord's presence on Imperial forces extends beyond its obvious combat capabilities to include an aura of inevitable doom that affects even veteran soldiers and space marines. The creature's tactical perfection and apparent invincibility create despair among enemy forces who recognize that they face an opponent whose capabilities exceed anything in their experience. This psychological warfare component enhances the Swarmlord's tactical effectiveness by undermining enemy morale before physical combat begins, creating conditions that favor Tyranid victory through the collapse of Imperial unit cohesion and command authority. The systematic development of Imperial countermeasures against the Tyranid threat began in the aftermath of Hive Fleet Behemoth's assault on Ultramar, when it became clear that conventional military doctrine proved inadequate against bioadaptive opponents who could evolve countermeasures faster than Imperial forces could develop new tactics. The Ultramarines' hard-won victory at Ma Crag provided crucial battlefield data about Tyranid capabilities and vulnerabilities, but the cost in Space Marine lives and materiel demonstrated that traditional Codex Astartes tactics required fundamental revision when applied to the Great Devourer. Marneus Calgar's personal experiences during the Ma Crag campaign, particularly his devastating encounter with the Genestealer that cost him both hands, became the foundation for developing specialized anti-Tyranid combat protocols. The chapter Master's detailed after-action reports described creatures that could adapt their defensive capabilities within single engagements, forcing Imperial forces to abandon established tactical patterns in favor of constantly evolving combat methods. These reports reached the highest levels of Imperial command, including the Adeptus Astartes High Command on Terra and the Strategic Planning Councils of the Adeptus Munitorum. The establishment of the Tyrannic War Veterans program emerged from recognition that surviving veterans of Tyranid encounters possessed irreplaceable tactical knowledge that could mean the difference between victory and defeat in future engagements. These battle-hardened warriors had observed Tyranid adaptation patterns firsthand, learning to recognize the subtle behavioral changes that preceded new evolutionary developments. Their experiences provided the foundation for developing training protocols that could prepare Imperial forces for the unique challenges of fighting bioadaptive opponents. Tyrannic war veterans underwent specialized psychological conditioning designed to maintain combat effectiveness despite the horror of facing creatures that seemed to learn from every exchange of fire. Standard Imperial military training emphasized the importance of established tactical doctrines and equipment reliability, but Tyranid warfare required constant adaptation and improvisation that challenged fundamental assumptions about military organization. Veterans learned to recognize when established tactics were failing and develop alternative approaches before their opponents could exploit tactical stagnation. The training regimens developed for Tyrannic war veterans incorporated lessons learned from every major Tyranid engagement, creating comprehensive combat doctrines that address the specific challenges of fighting bioadaptive opponents. These programs emphasized flexibility over rigid adherence to established procedures, teaching soldiers to observe enemy behavior patterns and adjust their tactics accordingly. Veterans learned to identify the subtle signs that indicated when Tyranid organisms were developing new adaptations, allowing them to modify their approach before their opponents could complete their evolutionary adjustments. Specialized combat techniques developed by Tyrannic war veterans included rapid weapon switching protocols that prevented Tyranid organisms from adapting to specific types of firepower. These tactics required soldiers to carry multiple weapon types and switch between them at predetermined intervals, maintaining constant pressure while preventing their opponents from developing effective countermeasures. Veterans also learned to coordinate their fire patterns with other units, creating overlapping fields of fire that forced Tyranid organisms to adapt to multiple different weapon types simultaneously. The psychological aspects of Tyrannic war veteran training addressed the unique mental challenges of fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate every tactical decision. Standard Imperial military psychology emphasized the importance of unit cohesion and confidence in established doctrine, but Tyranid warfare created situations where traditional approaches failed repeatedly. Veterans learned mental conditioning techniques that allowed them to maintain combat effectiveness even when facing opponents that seemed to counter their every move. Close-quarters combat training for Tyrannic war veterans incorporated detailed analysis of Tyranid organism anatomy and behavioral patterns, teaching soldiers to identify vulnerable points that remained consistent across different bioform adaptations. Veterans learned to target specific organ clusters and structural weak points that Tyranid organisms could not easily modify without compromising their basic functionality. These techniques required precise timing and positioning, as the targeted vulnerable points were often small and well protected by natural armor plating. The development of specialized equipment for tyrannic war veterans included modifications to standard Imperial weapons that enhanced their effectiveness against bioadaptive opponents. Bolter rounds were redesigned with variable detonation patterns that made it difficult for Tyranid organisms to develop consistent defensive adaptations, while flamer fuel mixtures incorporated compounds that could penetrate the acid-resistant secretions that many bioforms used for protection. Power weapons received enhanced disruption field generators that could maintain cutting effectiveness even against rapidly evolving defensive carapaces. Communication protocols developed for anti-Tyranid operations addressed the unique challenges of coordinating military actions against opponents that could disrupt conventional command structures through targeted elimination of officers and communication specialists. Tyrannic war veterans learned to operate with minimal external coordination, making tactical decisions based on immediate battlefield conditions rather than waiting for orders from higher command levels. These decentralized command structures proved more resilient against Tyranid tactics that specifically targeted Imperial command hierarchies. The Ordo Xenos' response to the Tyranid threat involved the complete restructuring of their xenological research priorities and threat assessment protocols. Previous Xenos encounters had involved species with relatively static capabilities that could be studied and countered through conventional research methods, but the Tyranids' bioadaptive nature required entirely new approaches to intelligence gathering and threat analysis. Inquisitors specializing in xenological threats found their established methodologies inadequate when applied to organisms that could evolve countermeasures faster than Imperial researchers could develop new weapons. Inquisitor Kripman's extensive research into Tyranid biology and behavior patterns provided the foundation for developing comprehensive threat assessment protocols that could predict Hive Fleet movement patterns and consumption priorities. His analysis of captured ship navigation organs revealed that Tyranid fleets followed predictable routes toward high biomass targets, allowing Imperial forces to anticipate their approach vectors and prepare defensive positions accordingly. These predictive models became essential tools for Imperial strategic planning, enabling the pre-positioning of defensive assets and the evacuation of civilian populations from threatened worlds. The establishment of specialized Ordo Xenos research facilities dedicated to Tyranid studies required unprecedented security measures to prevent contamination of Imperial personnel and equipment. These installations incorporated multiple containment barriers designed to prevent the escape of captured organisms while protecting researchers from exposure to Tyranid bioweapons and psychological influence. The facility's isolation protocols ensured that any containment breach would remain localized, preventing the spread of Tyranid organisms or genetic material to populated areas. Xenobiological research conducted at these facilities provided crucial insights into Tyranid adaptation mechanisms and reproductive cycles, revealing vulnerabilities that could be exploited through targeted weapons development. Researchers discovered that Tyranid organisms required specific environmental conditions to maintain their adaptive capabilities, suggesting that certain atmospheric compositions or temperature ranges could impair their evolutionary responses. These findings led to the development of specialized area denial weapons that could create environmental conditions hostile to Tyranid adaptation processes. The development of psychic countermeasures against the shadow in the warp required collaboration between the Ordo Xenos and the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, as conventional psychic defenses proved inadequate against the alien nature of Tyranid psychic phenomena. Imperial psychers working in areas affected by the shadow reported experiencing alien thoughts and sensations that differed fundamentally from normal warp-based psychic contact. These experiences provided valuable data about the nature of Tyranid collective consciousness, while also revealing potential methods for disrupting their psychic network. Specialized psychic training programs developed for operations in shadow-affected areas taught Imperial psychers to recognize and resist the influence of the Hive Mind while maintaining their own psychic abilities. These techniques required extensive mental conditioning that allowed psychers to filter out alien psychic influences without completely severing their connection to the warp. The training proved extremely dangerous, as prolonged exposure to Tyranid psychic phenomena could result in permanent psychological damage or complete mental breakdown. The coordination protocols established between different Ordo Xenos research facilities ensured that discoveries made at individual installations could be rapidly disseminated to other researchers working on related projects. This information sharing network proved crucial for developing comprehensive understanding of Tyranid capabilities, as different Hive fleets often displayed variations in their biological systems and tactical approaches. The centralized database maintained by the Ordo Xenos became the definitive repository of Imperial knowledge about Tyranid biology and behavior. Technological innovations in anti-Tyranid weaponry began with the recognition that conventional Imperial ordnance proved inadequate against organisms that could rapidly develop resistance to specific weapon types. The Adeptus Mechanicus initiated comprehensive research programs designed to develop weapons systems that could maintain effectiveness against bio-adaptive opponents through variable output patterns and multiple damage mechanisms. These development programs required unprecedented cooperation between different Forge worlds, as the complexity of anti-Tyranid weapons exceeded the capabilities of individual manufacturing facilities. Specialized ammunition types developed for anti-Tyranid operations incorporated multiple damage mechanisms that made it difficult for organisms to develop comprehensive defensive adaptations. Hellfire rounds combined explosive detonation with acidic payloads that could penetrate organic armor while delivering toxic compounds directly into target tissue. The variable nature of these weapons required Tyranid organisms to develop multiple different defensive adaptations simultaneously, slowing their evolutionary response time and maintaining weapon effectiveness for extended periods. The development of improved flamer weapons addressed the particular effectiveness of fire-based attacks against Tyranid organisms, whose organic nature made them vulnerable to thermal damage that could not be easily countered through biological adaptation. Enhanced promethium fuel mixtures incorporated compounds that burned at higher temperatures while producing toxic gases that could penetrate respiratory systems and cause internal damage. These weapons proved particularly effective against swarm organisms, as their area effect nature made it difficult for individual creatures to develop specific countermeasures. Heavy flamer variants designed for space marine use incorporated enhanced fuel capacity and improved dispersal patterns that could engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining sustained fire rates. The weapon's enhanced range and penetration capabilities allowed space marines to engage Tyranid swarms at distances that reduced the risk of close combat encounters, where the creature's adaptive advantages proved most dangerous. Specialized fuel types developed for different environmental conditions ensured that flamer weapons remained effective across diverse planetary conditions. Void warfare innovations against Tyranid bioships required fundamental changes to Imperial naval doctrine, as conventional ship-to-ship combat tactics proved inadequate against living vessels that could repair damage and adapt their defensive systems during battle. Bioships possessed regenerative capabilities that allowed them to recover from damage that would permanently disable conventional spacecraft, while their organic nature made them resistant to many types of ordnance designed for use against mechanical targets. The development of specialized void weapons for anti-bioship operations focused on creating damage types that could not be easily regenerated or adapted against. Virus bombing techniques were modified to deliver biological agents specifically designed to disrupt Tyranid cellular functions, while remaining effective against organisms with enhanced resistance to conventional toxins. These weapons required careful deployment to prevent contamination of Imperial vessels, as the biological agents proved dangerous to human personnel despite their optimization for anti-Tyranid effects. Nova Cannon modifications incorporated specialized warheads designed to create massive energy discharges that could overwhelm bioship defensive systems through sheer destructive power. The weapon's variable output settings allowed Imperial commanders to adjust their destructive yield based on target size and defensive capabilities, ensuring maximum damage while conserving ammunition for extended engagements. The psychological impact of these weapons on bioship coordination systems often proved as valuable as their direct destructive effects. Boarding action protocols for engaging bioships required extensive modifications to standard Imperial assault procedures, as the internal structure of living vessels differed fundamentally from conventional spacecraft design. Bioship corridors could change configuration during battle, sealing off access routes while channeling boarders into prepared kill zones, where specialized defensive organisms waited in ambush. Imperial assault teams learned to carry specialized equipment for cutting through organic barriers while maintaining constant movement to avoid being trapped by shifting internal structures. The controversial nature of the Kryptman doctrine emerged from the Inquisitors' radical approach to containing the Tyranid threat through preemptive exterminatus operations that sacrificed inhabited worlds to deny biomass to approaching Hive Fleets. This strategy represented a fundamental departure from traditional Imperial defensive doctrine, which emphasized the protection of human populations and Imperial territory rather than their deliberate destruction. The doctrine's implementation required authorization at the highest levels of Imperial government, as the systematic destruction of loyal Imperial worlds challenged basic principles of the Imperium's protective mandate. Kryptman's strategic analysis of Tyranid consumption patterns revealed that Hive Fleets could be redirected through careful manipulation of biomass availability along their projected approach routes. By creating corridors of sterilized worlds that offered no sustenance to bioships, Imperial forces could channel Tyranid fleets toward predetermined target areas where defensive preparations could be concentrated for maximum effectiveness. This strategy required precise timing and extensive intelligence about Hive Fleet navigation patterns to ensure that the sterilization operations achieved their intended strategic effects. The implementation of Kryptman doctrine operations involved the systematic identification of worlds that lay along projected Tyranid approach routes, followed by rapid deployment of exterminatus assets to eliminate their populations before bioships could arrive to consume them. These operations required enormous logistical coordination, as multiple worlds needed to be sterilized simultaneously to create effective biomass denial corridors. The timing of these strikes proved crucial, as premature action could alert Hive Fleets to Imperial intentions, while delayed operations might allow bioships to reach target worlds before sterilization could be completed. The political ramifications of the Kryptman doctrine created unprecedented controversy within Imperial leadership circles, as planetary governors and sector commanders found themselves ordered to cooperate in the destruction of worlds under their protection. Many Imperial officials viewed the doctrine as a betrayal of the Imperium's fundamental obligation to protect human populations, while others recognized it as a necessary sacrifice to prevent even greater losses to Tyranid consumption. These disagreements created serious tensions within Imperial command structures that affected coordination of anti-Tyranid operations. The moral implications of deliberately sacrificing loyal Imperial citizens to deny resources to xenos invaders challenged fundamental assumptions about Imperial values and strategic priorities. Military commanders found themselves implementing orders that directly contradicted their training and oath obligations, while civilian administrators struggled to justify actions that eliminated entire planetary populations without offering them any opportunity for evacuation or defense. The psychological impact of these operations on Imperial personnel proved as significant as their strategic effects. The effectiveness of Kryptman Doctrine operations in redirecting Hive Fleet Leviathan toward the Octarius sector demonstrated the strategy's potential for achieving strategic objectives, while also revealing its limitations and unintended consequences. The successful channeling of Tyranid forces into conflict with Orc populations achieved the immediate goal of preventing their advance toward more critical Imperial territories, but the long-term implications of creating a perpetual war between two major xenos threats remained unclear. The strengthening of both species through constant warfare created new threats that could potentially exceed the original Tyranid danger. The condemnation of Inquisitor Kryptman by his peers within the Ordo Xenos reflected deep philosophical divisions about acceptable methods for protecting the Imperium from existential threats. Many Inquisitors viewed the systematic destruction of loyal Imperial worlds as crossing moral boundaries that should not be violated regardless of strategic necessity, while others supported Kryptman's actions as representing the kind of difficult decisions required to ensure humanity's survival. These debates continued long after the immediate crisis had passed, influencing Imperial policy toward future Xenos threats. The legacy of the Kryptman Doctrine extended beyond its immediate tactical applications to influence broader Imperial strategic thinking about acceptable losses and strategic priorities. The precedent established by the systematic sacrifice of Imperial worlds to achieve strategic objectives created new possibilities for future operations, while also establishing limits on the methods that Imperial commanders could employ. The doctrine's implementation demonstrated both the potential effectiveness of radical strategic approaches and the political costs associated with their implementation. The psychic phenomenon known as the shadow in the warp represents perhaps the most strategically devastating aspect of the Tyranid threat, extending far beyond the immediate tactical implications of their bio-adaptive warfare to fundamentally disrupt the very foundations of Imperial civilization. This alien psychic presence manifests as a suffocating darkness that permeates the immaterium wherever significant Tyranid forces gather, creating zones of psychic interference that can render entire star systems effectively isolated from the broader Imperium. The shadow's effects compound exponentially with the concentration of Tyranid organisms, reaching maximum intensity around major Hive Fleet concentrations, where the collective psychic emanations of billions of creatures create an impenetrable barrier to conventional warp-based communication and navigation. The nature of the Hive Mind's psychic presence differs fundamentally from any other known form of warp-based consciousness, operating through mechanisms that Imperial scholars struggle to comprehend despite centuries of study. Rather than channeling energy from the warp in the manner of human psychers or chaos entities, the Tyranid collective consciousness appears to generate its own psychic field through the synchronized mental activity of countless individual organisms. This field creates a form of psychic static that drowns out normal warp currents, making it impossible for astropaths to send or receive messages across interstellar distances, while simultaneously disrupting the psychic phenomena that enable faster-than-light travel. The Hive Mind's distributed intelligence network operates through biological neural connections that span entire star systems, with individual organisms serving as specialized nodes within a vast computational matrix. Synapse creatures function as primary relay stations, their enlarged brain structures processing and transmitting vast amounts of tactical and sensory data, while maintaining constant communication with higher-level command organisms. The psychic emanations generated by these neural networks create interference patterns that interact destructively with normal warp phenomena, effectively jamming the psychic frequencies used by Imperial communication systems. Imperial astropaths operating in areas affected by the shadow report experiencing sensations that differ fundamentally from normal warp-based psychic contact. Instead of the familiar currents and eddies of the immaterium, they encounter what they describe as an alien presence that presses against their consciousness with overwhelming force. This psychic pressure manifests as a sensation of being observed by countless hostile intelligences, creating psychological stress that can drive even experienced psychers to madness within hours of exposure. The alien nature of this contact makes it impossible for human minds to process the information contained within the Hive Mind's psychic emanations, resulting in severe psychological trauma for any psyker who attempts direct communication. The progression of shadow-induced madness follows predictable patterns that Imperial medical personnel have documented across hundreds of cases involving psychers exposed to Tyranid psychic phenomena. Initial symptoms include severe headaches and disorientation, as the psycher's mind struggles to process alien thought patterns that operate according to completely different cognitive principles. These early warning signs rapidly escalate to include hallucinations, paranoid delusions, and violent outbursts as the human psyche becomes overwhelmed by contact with an intelligence that views all other life as potential biomass for consumption. Advanced stages of shadow-induced psychic trauma result in complete mental breakdown as the affected psycher's consciousness becomes fragmented by prolonged exposure to alien thought processes. Many victims report experiencing memories that belong to consumed organisms, including detailed recollections of being digested alive by Tyranid bioforms. These traumatic visions prove particularly devastating because they carry the absolute certainty of genuine memory rather than the uncertainty of nightmares or hallucinations. The psychological impact of experiencing death and consumption from the perspective of Tyranid victims creates lasting trauma that proves resistant to conventional therapeutic intervention. The creation of psychic dead zones around major Hive Fleet concentrations represents one of the most strategically significant effects of the shadow in the warp, as these regions become completely isolated from Imperial command and control networks. Astropathic communication within these zones becomes impossible, preventing Imperial forces from coordinating their defensive efforts while denying them access to reinforcements and strategic intelligence from outside the affected area. The isolation created by these dead zones forces Imperial commanders to operate with complete tactical autonomy, making strategic decisions based solely on local intelligence without guidance from higher command authorities. The boundaries of shadow-affected regions fluctuate based on the concentration and movement of Tyranid forces, creating dynamic zones of psychic interference that can expand or contract within hours as bioships maneuver through star systems. Imperial forces operating near these boundaries often find their communication capabilities intermittently disrupted as they move in and out of shadow-affected areas. These fluctuations create additional tactical challenges, as commanders cannot predict when their communication systems will function normally and when they will be completely cut off from external support. The range and intensity of shadow affects vary significantly based on the size and composition of Tyranid forces in any given region. Small reconnaissance forces or isolated genestealer cults create minimal psychic disturbances that might only be detectable by sensitive psychers operating in close proximity. However, major bioship concentrations or large ground-based swarms generate shadow effects that can be felt across entire star systems, with the most intense manifestations occurring around Hive Fleet command vessels that house the massive synapse creatures responsible for coordinating fleet operations. Imperial psychers attempting to operate within shadow-affected areas face immediate and severe risks that go far beyond the normal dangers associated with warp-based psychic phenomena. The alien nature of Tyranid psychic emanations makes it impossible for human psychers to establish the protective mental barriers that normally shield them from hostile warp entities. Instead of encountering familiar demon threats that operate according to recognizable psychological principles, psychers within the shadow find themselves exposed to an intelligence that views their consciousness as nothing more than another form of biological resource to be analyzed and consumed. The physiological effects of shadow exposure on Imperial psychers include severe neural trauma that manifests as physical damage to brain tissue rather than purely psychological symptoms. Medical examination of psychers who have survived exposure to intense shadow effects reveals patterns of neural degradation consistent with direct psychic attack, including damaged synaptic connections and areas of dead brain tissue where neurons have been destroyed by alien psychic contact. These physical injuries often prove permanent, leaving surviving psychers with reduced psychic abilities and ongoing neurological problems that affect their basic cognitive functions. Sanctioned psychers serving with Imperial Guard regiments face particular risks when operating in shadow-affected areas, as their limited training and weaker mental defenses make them extremely vulnerable to Tyranid psychic influence. Many Guard psychers suffer complete mental breakdown within minutes of entering areas affected by intense shadow phenomena, forcing their units to operate without psychic support during critical combat operations. The loss of psychic capabilities proves particularly devastating for Imperial forces that rely on psyker-guided artillery and communication systems, as these assets become completely unusable within shadow-affected zones. Librarians of the Adeptus Astartes demonstrate greater resistance to shadow effects due to their enhanced mental conditioning and superior psychic training, but even these elite psychers face severe limitations when operating against Tyranid forces. Space Marine librarians report that their normal psychic abilities become unreliable or completely suppressed within areas of intense shadow activity, forcing them to rely on conventional weapons and tactics rather than their supernatural capabilities. The psychological impact of losing their psychic powers proves particularly challenging for librarians, whose entire combat doctrine depends on their ability to channel warp-based phenomena. The impact of the shadow and the warp on chaos forces operating in Tyranid-infested regions creates complex strategic situations that Imperial commanders struggle to exploit effectively. Chaos Space Marines and demon entities that depend on warp-based powers find their abilities severely limited or completely suppressed within shadow-affected areas, creating tactical vulnerabilities that Imperial forces might potentially exploit. However, the same psychic interference that weakens Chaos forces also prevents Imperial psychers from operating effectively, negating many of the potential advantages that might otherwise be gained from Chaos vulnerability to shadow effects. Demon manifestations within shadow-affected regions become increasingly unstable as the alien psychic emanations interfere with the warp currents that sustain their physical presence in real space. Many demon entities find themselves unable to maintain corporeal form within areas of intense shadow activity, forcing them to retreat to regions beyond Tyranid psychic influence or risk being banished back to the warp. This effect proves particularly pronounced with lesser demon entities that lack the psychic strength to maintain their manifestations against the overwhelming pressure of the Hive Mind's collective consciousness. Chaos sorcerers attempting to channel warp-based powers within shadow-affected areas report experiencing severe backlash effects as their psychic abilities interact destructively with Tyranid psychic phenomena. The alien nature of the shadow makes it impossible for Chaos psychers to predict or control the results of their psychic manipulations, often resulting in catastrophic failures that can destroy the sorcerer and anyone in their immediate vicinity. These unpredictable effects force Chaos forces to avoid using psychic powers within shadow-affected regions, significantly reducing their tactical capabilities when fighting Tyranid forces. The theoretical implications of the shadow in the warp for the Emperor's psychic beacon represent one of the most terrifying potential consequences of large-scale Tyranid expansion toward the core regions of Imperial space. The Astronomicon operates through the focused psychic power of the Emperor, channeled through thousands of psychers working in carefully coordinated shifts, creating the psychic lighthouse that enables Imperial navigation throughout the galaxy. Should major Hive fleet concentrations approach Terra itself, their shadow effects could potentially interfere with or completely disrupt the Astronomicon's operation. Strategic analysts within the Adeptus Administratum have developed multiple contingency scenarios for potential shadow interference with the Astronomicon, ranging from partial disruption that would affect navigation in specific galactic regions to complete failure that would leave the entire Imperium isolated and unable to coordinate interstellar travel. The most catastrophic projections suggest that intense shadow effects around Terra could force the shutdown of the Astronomicon to protect the Emperor and his supporting psychers from alien psychic influence, effectively cutting off most of the Imperium from reliable warp navigation. The stability of the Astronomicon under shadow influence remains a subject of intense theoretical debate among Imperial scholars, as the unique nature of the Emperor's psychic power makes it difficult to predict how it would interact with Tyranid psychic phenomena. Some researchers theorize that the Emperor's divine nature might provide immunity to shadow effects, while others suggest that the alien psychic pressure could overwhelm even his supernatural abilities if applied with sufficient intensity. The lack of empirical data about these interactions makes it impossible to develop reliable contingency plans for protecting the Astronomicon from shadow interference. The cumulative effects of multiple Hive Fleet operations on the overall stability of warp currents throughout the galaxy represent a long-term threat that extends far beyond immediate tactical concerns about communication and navigation disruption. Each major Tyranid incursion creates lasting disturbances in local warp patterns that persist long after the bioships have moved on to other targets. These cumulative disturbances could potentially alter the fundamental structure of warp currents throughout the galaxy, creating navigational hazards and communication dead zones that would persist for centuries after the Tyranid threat has been eliminated. Imperial navigators operating in regions previously affected by major Hive Fleet activities report encountering persistent warp anomalies that make interstellar travel significantly more dangerous and unpredictable. These anomalies manifest as areas of turbulent warp currents that can trap vessels for extended periods or redirect them to completely unintended destinations. The navigational charts maintained by navigator houses require constant updating to account for these shadow-induced changes to established warp routes, creating additional logistical challenges for Imperial fleet operations. The psychological warfare implications of shadow effects extend beyond their direct impact on psychers to include broader effects on Imperial personnel operating in affected regions. The isolation created by communication blackouts generates feelings of abandonment and despair among Imperial forces who find themselves cut off from the broader Imperium during critical combat operations. This psychological pressure proves particularly devastating for Imperial Guard units, whose morale depends heavily on their connection to the Emperor, and the certainty that reinforcements and support remain available from higher command levels. The development of countermeasures against shadow effects has become a priority research area for the Ordo Malleus and Adeptus Astra Telepathica, though progress remains limited due to the alien nature of Tyranid psychic phenomena. Conventional psychic defenses prove inadequate against shadow effects because they are designed to counter warp-based threats that operate according to familiar principles. The Hive Mind's psychic emanations function through completely different mechanisms that bypass traditional protective measures, making it extremely difficult to develop effective countermeasures using existing Imperial psychic techniques. Experimental research into shadow countermeasures has focused on developing technological solutions that could provide psychic shielding without relying on human psychers or warp-based phenomena. These efforts have produced limited success with localized shielding devices that can protect small areas from shadow effects, but the power requirements for larger-scale protection exceed the capabilities of current Imperial technology. The development of more effective countermeasures remains constrained by the Imperium's limited understanding of the fundamental principles underlying Tyranid psychic phenomena. The current trajectory of Hive Fleet movements across the galaxy presents a strategic nightmare that Imperial High Command struggles to address through conventional military planning. Intelligence gathered from multiple sources indicates that at least 6 major Hive Fleets continue their relentless advance through different sectors simultaneously, each following consumption patterns that suggest coordinated strategic planning on a scale that exceeds human comprehension. Leviathan's tendrils continue their inexorable push toward the segmentum solar, having already consumed dozens of worlds along their projected approach routes, while adapting to every defensive measure Imperial forces have deployed against them. The bioships comprising these fleets demonstrate consumption efficiency that has improved dramatically since the first encounters with Behemoth decades earlier. Current intelligence estimates suggest that major bioships can now process an entire Hive world's biomass within standard Tyran months, rather than the years required by earlier Hive fleet operations. This accelerated consumption rate reflects evolutionary improvements in Tyranid digestion systems and resource processing capabilities, allowing fleets to maintain their operational tempo while rapidly expanding their combat strength through the incorporation of consumed biological material. Reconnaissance data from Adeptus Mechanicus monitoring stations positioned throughout affected regions reveals disturbing patterns in bioship construction and deployment that suggest the Tyranids are preparing for conflicts of unprecedented scale and duration. Newly spawned bioships emerging from established breeding pools display enhanced void warfare capabilities and improved defensive systems that incorporate lessons learned from previous engagements with Imperial naval forces. These vessels possess specialized organs designed to counter specific Imperial weapon types, while their internal chambers house bioform configurations optimized for sustained planetary assault operations. The projected consumption rates calculated by Imperial strategic analysts paint an increasingly grim picture of galactic survival prospects under continued Tyranid expansion. Mathematical models based on observed fleet growth patterns and consumption efficiency improvements suggest that current Hive fleet operations could strip entire sectors of viable biomass within decades if their advance continues unchecked. These projections assume that Imperial defensive capabilities remain constant, but the reality of ongoing Tyranid adaptation suggests that resistance effectiveness will likely decline over time as the creatures develop countermeasures to human military technology. Intelligence reports from deep space monitoring stations detect massive gravitational anomalies beyond the galactic rim that suggest additional Hive fleets approaching from the intergalactic void. These signatures indicate bioship concentrations that dwarf even Leviathan's massive fleet, with some individual vessels measuring over 100 kilometers in length, according to long-range sensor analysis. The approaching fleets appear to be following the same psychic beacon created by the Astronomicon that originally drew the known Hive fleets to the Milky Way, suggesting that humanity's greatest navigational aid may ultimately prove responsible for attracting the species' extinction. The temporal implications of these approaching reinforcements create strategic challenges that exceed the Imperium's current military capabilities by several orders of magnitude. Even if Imperial forces somehow managed to eliminate all currently active Hive fleets through unprecedented military success, the incoming fleets would arrive to find a galaxy already mapped and analyzed by their predecessors' reconnaissance efforts. These new arrivals would possess detailed intelligence about Imperial defensive capabilities and tactical doctrines, allowing them to deploy countermeasures from the moment they enter Imperial space. Xenobiological analysis of captured Tyranid genetic material reveals evidence of biological templates derived from species that could not have originated within the Milky Way galaxy. The cellular structures contain isotopic signatures consistent with stellar radiation patterns found only in distant galactic clusters, while specialized organelles demonstrate adaptations to environmental conditions that do not exist anywhere within known space. This evidence strongly supports theories that the Tyranids have already consumed multiple galaxies during their journey through the cosmic void, incorporating the biological knowledge of countless extinct civilizations into their ever-expanding genetic databases. The theoretical scenarios developed by Imperial strategic planners for total galactic consumption follow predictable patterns based on observed Tyranid operational methods and resource requirements. Complete biomass harvesting would likely require several centuries given current consumption rates, but this timeline could be significantly reduced if additional Hive fleets continue arriving from the intergalactic void. The process would begin with the elimination of major population centers and industrial worlds that provide the greatest biomass concentrations, followed by systematic harvesting of agricultural worlds and frontier colonies until no viable biological material remains. During the final phases of galactic consumption, the Tyranids would likely focus their efforts on extracting trace biological compounds from previously sterilized worlds, while processing the organic components of deceased civilizations that have been preserved in various forms. Even worlds subjected to exterminatus bombardment contain significant quantities of biological material in the form of fossilized remains and organic compounds trapped within geological formations. The Tyranids' advanced biochemistry capabilities would allow them to extract and process these materials, ensuring that no potential biomass source remains unexploited. The ultimate destination of Hive fleets after completing their consumption of the Milky Way presents questions that challenge human understanding of Tyranid motivations and long-term objectives. Astronomical observations reveal numerous galaxies within the local galactic cluster that could serve as potential targets for future consumption operations, each containing billions of stars and presumably countless worlds teeming with biological material. The Tyranids' demonstrated ability to survive intergalactic travel suggests they could continue their expansion indefinitely, moving from galaxy to galaxy until they have consumed all available biomass within the observable universe. The psychological implications of this cosmic-scale threat create existential challenges that extend far beyond immediate military concerns about tactical doctrine and resource allocation. Imperial citizens who become aware of the Tyranids' true nature and ultimate objectives often experience complete psychological breakdown as they confront the reality that their species faces not just conquest or subjugation, but total annihilation. The knowledge that humanity's entire existence represents nothing more than a temporary obstacle to the Tyranids' endless hunger creates despair that proves resistant to conventional methods of maintaining morale and unit cohesion. The necessity of unprecedented cooperation between traditional enemies has become increasingly apparent as the scope of the Tyranid threat exceeds the defensive capabilities of any single faction within the galaxy. Imperial strategic analysts have begun developing theoretical frameworks for military cooperation with Orc empires, Eldar craftworlds, and even certain Chaos factions, whose continued existence depends on maintaining viable populations of sentient beings. These cooperation protocols represent fundamental departures from established Imperial doctrine, acknowledging that humanity's survival may require temporary alliances with species and entities previously considered irredeemable enemies. The Eldar response to the Tyranid threat demonstrates the potential for such cooperation, as their prescient abilities provide strategic intelligence that could prove crucial for coordinating multi-species defensive operations. Farseer visions of potential futures consistently show scenarios where divided resistance leads to universal extinction, while coordinated efforts between different species create possibilities for survival that no single faction could achieve independently. The Eldar's advanced technology and intimate knowledge of warp-based phenomena could provide capabilities that complement human military strength and industrial capacity. Orc empires throughout the galaxy represent both potential allies and significant obstacles to coordinated anti-Tyranid operations. The Greenskins' natural aggression and combat effectiveness make them valuable assets in direct confrontations with Tyranid forces, while their rapid reproductive cycle provides population resilience that could prove crucial during extended campaigns. However, Orc psychology and social organization make them unreliable allies whose cooperation would require careful management to prevent them from turning their weapons against human forces once immediate Tyranid threats have been eliminated. The potential involvement of Chaos forces in anti-Tyranid operations creates complex strategic and moral dilemmas that challenge fundamental Imperial principles about acceptable methods for ensuring human survival. Chaos entities and their mortal servants possess capabilities that could prove effective against Tyranid bioadaptive systems, particularly demon manifestations that operate according to principles completely alien to biological evolution. However, any cooperation with Chaos forces would require Imperial commanders to accept the risk that their temporary allies might prove more dangerous than the original Tyranid threat. The technological innovations required to achieve effective multi-species cooperation exceed current Imperial capabilities in several critical areas, particularly regarding communication systems that could coordinate operations between factions with fundamentally different technological bases and operational doctrines. Imperial Vox networks prove inadequate for communicating with Eldar forces whose technology operates on completely different principles, while Orc equipment lacks the sophistication required for complex tactical coordination. Developing compatible communication protocols would require unprecedented technological collaboration between species that have maintained strict separation for millennia. Logistical challenges associated with multi-species operations include fundamental incompatibilities in supply requirements, equipment specifications, and tactical doctrines that would need to be resolved before effective cooperation could be achieved. Imperial forces require massive supply chains to maintain their equipment and personnel, while Eldar operations depend on technologies that cannot be replicated using human manufacturing capabilities. Orc forces generate their own equipment through improvised construction methods that produce unreliable but effective weapons systems incompatible with Imperial maintenance protocols. The command structure required for coordinating multi-species anti-Tyranid operations would need to address fundamental differences in military organization and decision-making processes between different factions. Imperial command hierarchies operate according to rigid protocols that emphasize discipline and adherence to established doctrine, while Eldar forces follow guidance from Farseers whose prescient visions may contradict conventional tactical analysis. Orc military organization depends on personal dominance and combat prowess rather than formal rank structures, making it difficult to integrate their forces into coordinated operational plans. The long-term implications of such cooperation extend far beyond immediate military objectives, to include potential changes in galactic political structures and interspecies relationships that could fundamentally alter the nature of civilization within the Milky Way. Successful cooperation against the Tyranid threat might establish precedents for future collaboration that could lead to permanent alliances or even integration between previously hostile species. Alternatively, the temporary nature of anti-Tyranid cooperation could create new conflicts as different factions attempt to exploit their wartime partnerships for post-war advantages. The ultimate question facing all galactic civilizations involves whether any combination of existing military capabilities and technological resources could prove sufficient to halt the Tyranid advance before total consumption becomes inevitable. Current projections suggest that even perfect cooperation between all major galactic powers might only delay the final outcome rather than preventing it entirely, given the scale of Tyranid forces approaching from the intergalactic void. The mathematical reality of exponential bioship reproduction rates versus finite galactic biomass resources indicates that the Tyranids possess inherent advantages that may prove insurmountable regardless of defensive coordination. The Tyranid threat represents more than a military challenge or political crisis. It constitutes an existential test of whether intelligence and cooperation can overcome the blind hunger of evolution taken to its ultimate extreme. The Great Devourer approaches not as a conqueror seeking territory or resources, but as a force of nature that recognizes no distinction between ally and enemy, between the sacred and profane, between hope and despair. Against this endless hunger, the galaxy's scattered civilizations must find unity or face the darkness of universal extinction. The choice between cooperation and annihilation has never been more clear, nor the consequences of failure more absolute. In the grim darkness of the far future, even the most bitter enemies must stand together, or watch as everything they have ever known disappears into the maw of the great devourer forever.